You stand at the edge of a field that smells like trampled thyme and hot iron, and you watch an army rearrange itself like a puzzle learning a new picture. At your left, the old Republican Legion spreads out in chessboard stitches, little blocks with gaps between them, manipuli of hastati, principes, and triarii stacked in 3 lines, the triplex aces Polybius would recognize without cleaning his glasses. At your right, the imperial machine gathers into broader, steadier slabs, 10 cohorts, each a small legion in miniature, locking together until the line looks less like checkerboard and more like a smooth hinge. You blink, and the century turns. The legion decides it prefers sentences with fewer commas. Walk through the older sentence first. A Republican legion, on paper, fields some 4,200 to 5,000 citizen infantry organized into 30 maniples, 2 centuries apiece, plus a sprinkling of allied cavalry on the wings. The front rank, hastati, are younger men with nerves to spare. Behind them stand the principes, older and better off. In the third line wait the triarii, veterans holding long spears and everyone's last confidence. Those famous gaps between maniples? They're doors, space for relief, for skirmishers to dart through, for the front to fall back without creating a rumor. Command trickles through tribunes and centurions, and the whole array breathes like a concertina. Push, rest, rotate, try not to die impressively. Now step to the imperial side and feel how the air thickens with standardization. After the long grind of the late Republic and the Civil Wars, the legions settle into cohort form. 10 cohorts per legion, each a block of 6 centuries, on paper 480 men, with the first cohort double strength and extra swagger. Centurions become the bones. The pilus prior of each cohort learns to move 480 hearts like one muscle. Cohorts stand shoulder to shoulder without those old chessboard gaps. Reserves wait behind in deeper cohorts instead of in a separate line of triarii. The point is simplicity in the moment that matters, fewer transitions to botch, fewer social layers to babysit, a command ladder that knows which rung breaks least. Mainstream fact to pin your map. By Caesar's time you already see cohorts used tactically in Gaul. He writes of deploying cohorts as the maneuver unit, and under Augustus the cohort-based legion becomes standard. 10 cohorts, the first often double strength. A notional paper strength around 5,000 citizen heavy infantry, supported by auxiliary cohorts and aili for cavalry and missiles. The manipular distinctions, hastati, principes, triarii, fade from organization into memory, though the phrase, "It has come to the triarii," survives in Latin as, "We're down to our last option," which is exactly the kind of idiom soldiers keep when tables turn. Why the change? You can feel the reasons in your boots. First, coherence. A cohort gives a commander a chunk big enough to matter and small enough to steer. In the close, ugly minutes when pila fly and dust edits the horizon, shouting, "Second cohort forward, fourth follow, third hold," is cleaner than juggling 15 pairs of maniples that always need introductions. Second, social glue. The old system mapped wealth and age to where you stood. The new one mixes experience inside each cohort, letting centurions spread calm along a shorter leash. Third, administration, pay, rations, tenting, punishments, praise. Everything scales more neatly when your ledger thinks in tens. Even courage appreciates tidy columns. You march with a cohort for an hour and notice how the structure tucks into itself. 8 men share a leather sour tent, contubernium, and 2 such squads buddy up. 6 centuries file into a cohort. 10 cohorts settle into a legion. 2 or 3 legions, plus auxiliaries, shape a field army. Alignment becomes instinct. When the cornicen blows a particular rising note, the cohort closes ranks like shutters in a coastal squall. When a signifer dips the standard, the front centuries trade places with the second line without stepping on each other's sandals. The whole point is turning messy human reaction into choreography you can trust while someone screams nearby. Historians still argue whether to pin the cohort's triumph on one man or many decades. You hear the story that Gaius Marius abolished the maniples and birthed the cohort legion in the late 100s BC. You also hear the quieter verdict that cohorts had been used flexibly for years, that Marius formalized trends rather than invented them, and that the civil wars hammered the cohort system into a habit because habits that win tend to stay. The debate also circles the first cohorts, double strength and role, elite by statute or by tradition, and whether Caesar's specific deployments reflect emergency genius or emerging doctrine. Reasonable people, armed with inscriptions and adjectives, still duel politely. Stand at the seam where tactics meets paperwork. In the manipular world, each line had its personality. Hastati threw and tested. Principes finished the conversation. Triarii folded arms and judged. In the cohort world, every cohort carries its own conversation inside. The front sentries throw pila, then bite with the gladius. The second line prepares to relieve or reinforce. The rear line keeps the rumor of reserve alive. Reserves are no longer a distant third line with aristocratic eyebrows. They are 10 paces behind you, which is better for nerves. Flexibility shifts from the gaps between maniples to the relief drills within cohorts. Quirky tidbit: a centurion's vine staff, the vitus, is both symbol and multi-tool. He points with it, leans on it, and if necessary, persuades a laggard's back that discipline is a verb. Soldiers joke that the vitus can measure a man's honesty to within one bruise. Another field truth, the legion's eagle, the Aquila, now lives at the heart of the first cohort. Men swear that if the line breaks, the eagle burns before it runs. It's mostly rhetoric. Eagles are heavy, and even poetry has limits, but the standard's pull on morale is real enough to move hills. Walk the formations in your head the way a centurion does after night watch. On flat ground and confident, you put cohorts too deep, a broad front, second line ready to plug holes or lunge when the other side blinks. In rough country, you stack cohorts narrower and deeper, using the third and fourth to staircase around folds in the ground. Under cavalry threat, you angle sentry faces inward, bristles of pila out, makeshift hedgehogs that convince horses to discuss philosophy elsewhere. In siege approaches, cohorts march by files, shields carried high, artillery wagons bumping behind. On signal, the files flower into a line in more time than it takes to regret an undercooked breakfast. You don't abandon the old chessboard brain entirely. Light troops still skirmish forward. The cohort's first ranks still throw pilau the way a conversation throws an opening question. The close comes with shields locked and short blades punching under ribs where poetry won't follow. But the cohort teaches consistency. Every block can do the essential sequence, and commanders can build a battle out of interchangeable cogs instead of bespoke bravura. It's less romantic and more survivable, the kind of trade veterans recommend. Mainstream detail, because numbers calm anxious listeners. A mature Imperial Legion lists roughly 5,000 citizen infantry, paper, divided into 10 cohorts. Each cohort has 6 centuries of about 80 men, again, paper, except the first with double century strength and more senior centurions. Add the camp followers, engineers, artillery crews, and the auxiliary cohorts and cavalry elite paired with the legion, and your marching column becomes a small city with better shoes. Paper strengths lie. Payrolls try to tell the truth. Reality takes what it's given and fights with that. Light joke 1. A veteran explains that in the old days, if things went badly, it came to the triarii. In the new days, if things go badly, it comes to the second cohort's second line, which is less poetic but much better for sleep. Light joke 2. A clerk says cohorts make his job easy because everything fits in tens. A centurion says tens make his job hard because everyone expects the math to save them. Light joke 3. A young recruit asks where the triarii are now. The optio points at his own knees and says, "Closer than you think." Historians still argue whether the cohort's supremacy owed more to politics than to tactics. A cohort legion is easier to raise, pay, and standardize, very useful when armies now serve long terms under one general, and civil wars require portable loyalty. Did the form follow the needs of empire? Prolonged campaigns in Spain, Gaul, the East, where a flexible, self-contained tactical unit travels better than class-coded lines? Or did generals prefer cohorts because their authority ran smoother through centurions than through aristocratic young men practicing speeches between volleys? The sources: Caesar's cool self-praise, Polybius' tidy admiration, later writers' tidy hindsight, let you argue both sides over an emperor.by sunset the field empties, and the shapes you watch dissolve into camp geometry. Ditches squared, gates named, tents laid out by cohort like a city that folds and unfolds faster than rumor. The old and the new share one truth: organization is courage. Whether you stand in a manipular checkerboard or under a cohort standard, you fight best when you know where your relief will come from and how far you have to go to find your water and your pay clerk. The cohort legion writes that certainty into the day's muscle memory. Tomorrow you'll see how ranks and pay keep it loyal. For tonight you file the blueprint where it belongs, in the pocket behind your shield, next to the joke you'll tell if you're lucky enough to tell it. You open the legion's ledger and discover an army made of numbers that try very hard to be true. The column headings march as neatly as any cohort: strength on paper, strength in camp, strength fit for duty. Three cousins who share a last name and argue over dinner. You run a finger down the roster and meet the hierarchy that turns bread and bronze into obedience. The legate at the top, tribunes in clean cloaks, centurions with vine staves that have opinions, options with good memories, and the ordinary Miles who turns everyone's planning into reality by not falling over. Start at the peak you will not climb. The legatus Augusti Legionis commands the legion, senatorial rank, imperial commission, a man whose tent contains maps that smell of grease and arguments. He presides at councils, signs death warrants and discharge diplomas, thanks the gods loudly when the artillery behaves, and writes to the provincial governor about bridges as if both of them dreamed in timber. Under him, 6 tribuni Angusta Clavii, equestrians with the narrow stripe, and 1 tribunus Latoclavius, a young senator with the broad stripe, function as staff officers, inspecting, adjudicating, training, writing reports that will one day confuse historians. They command ad hoc detachments, supervise logistics, and in emergencies, learn how fast a stylus can become a spear. Below the tribunes, the real vertebrae, 60 centurions, 1 for each century, ranked like a staircase from the lowest of the 10th cohort up to the primus pilus, the first spear, of the first cohort, an office so respected that retirement comes with a pension that looks suspiciously like a villa. The centurion's job is weather control. He turns panic into drill and boredom into order. His deputy, the optio, stands at the rear with a stick and the useful habit of seeing what the centurion sees plus 2 things he missed. The tesserarius, keeper of the watchword, hands out passwords with the gravity of a priest. The signifer bears the standard and the payroll chest in a relationship that teaches courage. The cornicin and tubicin speak in brass so men move as if obeying a psalm. Mainstream fact to pin the table. By the early empire a legion's paper strength hovers around 5,000 citizen heavy infantry, plus or minus. Reality varies. Leadership includes 1 legate, 1 praefectus castrorum, camp prefect, often an ex-primus pilus who runs day-to-day matters and engineering, 5 or 6 equestrian tribunes plus 1 senatorial tribune, and 60 centurions. Pay scales under Augustus place a legionary's annual basic pay at 225 denarii, raised by Domitian to 300 and by Septimius Severus to 500, with deductions for rations, kit, and the mysteries of army accounting. A centurion may earn multiples, anywhere from 15 to over 50 times a private's pay depending on seniority. Primus Pilus steps into equestrian status on discharge. Donatives, one-off gifts on accession or victory, sweeten loyalty. The Aerarium Militare, founded in 6e, funds discharge bonuses, premia, so long service tastes like a promise kept. You flip pages to the pay line, where arithmetic keeps spears pointing the right way. Soldiers draw basic pay thrice yearly, in denarii that clink with imperial initials, IMP, TRP, COS, and the rest, minus stoppages for food, boots, and the occasional fine disguised as a life lesson. Extra rations, donativa fermentaria, arrive when grain convoys thrive. Cash donatives arrive when emperors remember that affection is expensive. Discharge bonuses glitter on distant horizons. Under Augustus, 3,000 denarii or a land grant after roughly 16 years, later extended toward 20 plus. Under Severus, sums grow as coins shrink, and veterans learn the difference between numbers and purchasing power, which is also a kind of education. Quirky tidbit: some paydays involve sealed leather bags stamped with cohort marks. A clerk slit each mouth like a fishmonger and counted under the signifier's glare. Another, the Aerarium Militare's revenue came partly from the 5% inheritance tax and 1% auction tax. Cynical legionaries nicknamed the military treasury grandfather's last march, a joke that plays better after your grandfather dies rich. Ranks smell of sweat more than ink. The Praefectus Castrorum, camp prefect, keeps the legion from becoming a festival, surveyor of marching camps, patron saint of pickaxes, scolder of engineers who love curves more than right angles. The immunes, specialists exempt from some drudgery, include surveyors, mensors, artillerymen, ballistarii, medics, medici, clerks, librarii, and armorers, fabri. The principales, junior NCOs, draw higher pay, sesquiplicarii, time and a half, duplicarii, double, for jobs with extra edges, beneficiarii, staff officers with a taste for stamps, cornicularii, chief clerks, curators, supply. The structure is both carrot and ladder. Ambition does not need poetry when it has increments. Historians still argue whether pay raises kept pace with inflation or merely chased it while panting. Numismatists count silver content, Nero's clip, severe and debasements, the 3rd century's thin promises, and compare them to papyri showing prices for grain, sandals, and beer. Some see a steady erosion offset by donatives and requisitions in kind. Others see soldiers' living standards holding surprisingly well thanks to rations, loot shares, and soft benefits like medical care and legal privileges. They also debate the social makeup of centurions. Were they promoted from the ranks as a meritocracy or imported as a parallel elite? Inscriptions show both routes. The army, like rivers, prefers more than one channel. The payroll has a moral column too. Soldiers swear the sacramentum, the oath, to the emperor and standards, not to a general who might retire inconveniently. The oath renews on anniversaries with enough incense to give piety a cough. Privileges follow the signature, legal standing to make wills in service, later formal marriage rights under Severus, and citizenship for auxiliaries on discharge, stamped on bronze diplomas with hinges that click like pride. Deductions remind men that thrift is a military virtue. Fines for lost kit, misfired temper, or late watch turn into stories about that one centurion who could smell a missing tent peg at 50 paces. Light joke 1. A tesserarius whispers the knight's password to a snoring sentry and fines him for not repeating it. Light joke 2. A signifer says he carries the cohort's soul in one hand and its cash in the other. A comrade replies, "Drop either and both are dead." Light joke 3. The Praefectus Castrorum claims engineers are optimists. The engineer says prefects are pessimists with better shoes. Paper strengths lie like polite men. Effective strength tells the truth with a limp. A centuries, 80, might stand 60 in the line after sickness, detachment, and the small attritions of real life. Hence the obsession with returns, renunciations, filed to tribunes, to legates, to governors, to anyone who might send replacements or at least sympathy. The cursus publicus carries these reports faster than gossip. The emperor's irrationibus tallies the empire's fighting pulse with an abacus that has seen more storms than statues. Promotion smells like scorched leather and saved lives. A miles with a good eye becomes an immunes, surveyor's assistant, artillery crew, then a principalis, optio, signifer, tesserarius, and if luck and lungs hold, a centurion whose vitus learns first names. Above him the ladder narrows, from cohort ranks to the first cohort, from pilus posterior to pilus prior, to primus pilus, a year of prestige that ends with a seat in the equestrian order and the right to decide, gently, which olive grove he prefers to be old in. The army likes to pretend this is all merit. Patronage smirks from behind the tent flap. The truth wears both sandals. Mainstream numbers again, because the ledger loves you. Under Augustus a legionary serves roughly 16 years, later extended to 20 plus. Basic pay 225 300, Domitian, 500, Severus, denarii, premia, discharge bonus. 3,000 denarii or land in early empire, later sums larger but lighter. Centurions earn from 3,750 up to 18,000 denarii in some estimates, with primus pilus soaring. Donativa at accessions vary wildly, Claudius modest, Nero showy, Flavian strategic, Severans generous to a fault. The aerarium militare funds bonuses from dedicated taxes. Pay is often supplemented or replaced at frontiers by an ona militaris in kind, grain, fodder, clothing, which makes accountants sigh but meals happy. Quirky tidbit 2. Legion pay chests sometimes traveled with miniature altars. Before opening, the signifer sprinkled wine and grain, because piety keeps thieves nervous. Another, the stipendium, pay period, rhythm aligned with festivals so that the gods could not be accused of making men count empty hands. Historians still argue whether the rank structure encouraged initiative or obedience. Centurions have reputations as both tacticians and disciplinarians. Some inscriptions boast of brilliance at charges and siege ladders, others of strictly keeping the watch. In Caesar's books, Centurion sees standards and moments. In Tacitus, a few enforce terror for emperors who confuse fear with order. The army's temperament shifts with reigns. Under good managers, the rank ladder conducts competence. Under paranoids, it conducts denunciations. The structure survives because even bad weather needs roofs. You close the ledger and hear the camp at payday twilight, laughter rehearsed, dice shaped like questionable decisions, the soft scratch of a clerk correcting a figure that should not have needed correcting. A tribune walks by with a stylus behind his ear and the air of a man who thinks logistics is romance. A centurion checks tent lines and sees, without looking, 3 errors and 1 good joke. The signifer locks the chest and touches the standard with a murmured sentence that might be prayer or inventory. The legion you counted on paper will present itself on the field tomorrow with numbers that matter less than habits. Pay turns oaths into schedules. Ranks turn schedules into confidence. You sleep better when ledgers balance. So do legions. You line up barefoot on cool flagstones that smell faintly of oil and chalk, and you try not to breathe like a man who cares about the next minute. The recruiting officer, decurio delectus for today's purposes, eyes the cue the way a baker eyes loaves, which will rise, which will sag, which should be sent back with a kind word, and a figure A measuring rod leans against the wall. A wax tablet waits for names. A small altar smokes just enough to remind everyone that oaths are not paperwork. You've come to trade seasons for standards, and the next few gestures decide whether the trade is good for both sides. Before the Principate regularizes everything, the Republic levies citizens by delectus. Magistrates choose by property class and age, assembling their chessboard of hostati, principes, and that backbench of grim triarii. Then the long, hungry wars grind the census down. Enter Gaius Marius, late 2nd century BC, who finds Rome needing more arms than property, and opens the ranks to the Capite censi, the head count poor. The state arms and trains them, equipment becomes standard. The army starts to look like a profession rather than a seasonal duty. Whether Marius invented the professional soldier is a historian's favorite drinking argument, but you can feel his fingerprints in the way the line you stand in cares more about shoulders than silver. Mainstream fact to fasten the banner. By the early empire, most legionaries are long service volunteers, nominal terms 16, 20+ years. Enlisted via local recruiting drives conducted by legion detachments or provincial governor's staff. Auxiliaries, non-citizen troops, are recruited across the provinces by cohort and ala, typically serving 25 years and receiving citizenship, recorded on hinged bronze diplomas, on honorable discharge. Formal conscription persists as a power, levies in crises, quotas assigned to communities, but the routine pulses voluntary enlistment sweetened with viaticum, travel money, kit, steady rations, and the distant glitter of a premium on retirement. Age and height come next, because the army is a tailor before it is a poet. The clerk asks your years. 17 to 23 is ideal for a legionary, younger if you're stout and a recruiter is optimistic, older if a vacancy needs filling and your scars tell a useful story. Height. The measuring stick is not law but habit. For Praetorians the tradition whispers, taller, some later sources utter numbers, while line legions prize proportion and lungs over an extra finger of bone. Historians still argue whether hard minimums truly existed, and what they were, or whether commanders used sufficient height as shorthand for overall fitness. Either way, you learn quickly that a broad back and good teeth open doors faster than a brilliant opinion about Cato. Medical looks like common sense with a stern face. The medicus checks eyes and joints, listens for a cough that means trouble, taps shins to guess how they will like marches. Missing toes? If you run well, perhaps no one counts. A limp from a fresh glory earns sympathy and a regret. A chronic wheeze earns a friendly nod toward the nearest farm. A recruiter has a quota, a cohort has standards. The compromise is a man who will stand a line without teaching his neighbor new swear words. Then the oath, because the army is paperwork bound by breath. You and the other selectees face the standard and lift your hands. The words change with emperors but the bones stay. You swear the sacramentum to the princeps, to obey orders, not desert, not abandon the standards, and to consider the emperor's command the frame of your courage. Under the Republic you would have sworn to consuls and the people. Now you speak one name, and the Aquila watches without blinking. The oath renews each year with ceremony. Early January is fashionable, and on accession days when loyalty tastes like incense and a coin, quirky tidbit, new recruits sometimes receive a small lead identity tag, signaculum, strapped around the neck, stamped with name and unit, a practical amulet that chaplains and pay clerks both admire. Another, the army issues a viaticum, travel money and rations for the road, to get you from the recruiting hall to the legion's camp. A thrifty man arrives with coins unbidden. A sociable man arrives with new friends and a story about why he will never drink that much vinegar wine again. Paper follows breath. The scribe Latinizes the edges of your name if they look too windy for a roll call, notes your birthplace, useful for pay routes and burial registers, and scratches a mark if you can't sign. If you're provincial and not yet a citizen, an auxiliary cohort beckons with its own pride and the bronze diploma that will one day make your children Roman and away taxes respect. Communities contribute by quota, especially in frontier provinces where an accommodating governor translates volunteer as you, and you, but gifts still outnumber grabs in peacetime. A decent recruiter knows that a willing man learns faster and runs slower in the wrong direction. Historians still argue whether the imperial army remained primarily Italian in early decades or provincial much sooner. Inscriptions drift outward from Italy across the 1st century CE, and by Trajan and Hadrian the legionary face is heavily provincial: Spain, Gaul, the Balkans, the East, while auxiliaries come from everywhere the road can reach: Thracian cavalry that ride like rumors, Syrian archers who make wind a weapon, Batavian swimmers who think rivers are jokes. This shift isn't cultural defeat, it's administrative victory, loyalty purchased with pay, law, and pensions. Rome discovers that citizenship printed on bronze diplomas sticks better than slogans. The recruiting room runs on gentle theater. A veteran posted as exactor delectus tells wide-eyed tales of three things: regular bread, the thrill of an eagle's shadow crossing your shield, and the day he bought his mother a tiled roof with money the army pretended it couldn't spare. He leaves out the blisters. He understates the boredom. He hints that courage is mostly consistency. A centurion steps in and taps his vitus on the floor once. Sound of wood on stone, promise more than threat, and the room discovers posture. Light joke 1. The measurer claims the rod got longer this year. The clerk says it shrank last year. The recruit suggests they meet in the middle and is advised to save his wit for latrine duty. Light joke 2. A nervy boy swears he is 20. His mother swears he is 16. The centurion counts the calluses on his hands and splits the difference. Light joke 3. The scribe asks a barbarian recruit to spell his father's name. The recruit grins and flexes. The scribe writes, Vald Fortis, and hopes no jurist reads the roll. Training begins the minute you stop being almost and become tyro. Marching first, because armies are legs with sharp edges, then weapons with weighted practice swords that punish wrists into strength, then shovel and pick because camps build themselves only in bad poems. The first week tastes of vinegar and humility. The second of pride taken in small straight lines. The third of the strange relief that comes when a horn call moves your feet before your brain finishes its sentence. A veteran mutters that recruits are dough. The oven is time. The bread is tomorrow's second line. Provincial quotas complicate the romance. A governor managing multiple cities sets targets. Pegasus A owes 30 men by the kalends. Town B owes 20 and a cart. The Alpine Valley owes 10 and a shrug. Civic elites herd young men toward the camp with speeches about honor and tax relief for the families. Smart recruiters sweeten the day with the promise of immunitas, exemption from some civic burdens, for the one who returns with a diploma. When crises bite, Dacian wars, Judean revolt, Orion disaster, levies get sharper, exemptions blur, voluntary finds a wider definition that only philosophers complain about out loud. Doubt there's a separate path for the tall and lucky. The Praetorians recruit mostly in Italy and sometimes with higher height and tighter screens, a post with better pay and more marble per mile. Historians still argue whether their height standards were ever as fixed as later writers report, or whether appearance and patronage did most of the work. The safer fact is that a city soldier's job is proximity. Emperors prefer men who look like statues and move like silence. Rumors haunt the corners. Do soldiers get tattooed? Some later texts suggest marks on the hand to bind identity and discourage desertion. Others make it administrative, an inked pass more than a brand. The debate persists in footnotes, and on forearms in reenactors' camps. Your recruiter prefers to talk about sandals. Do recruits sign contracts they can read? Sometimes a thumbprint and a witness do the job. The Army's real contract is the schedule you learn by the fourth dawn. Mainstream aside, tidy as a list pinned to a door. Sacramentum sworn to emperor and standards. Enlistment ages typically late teens to early 20s. viaticum issued, tyrosinea, recruit training, in marching, weapons, entrenchment. Auxiliaries recruited among peregrini with citizenship on discharge. Bronze diplomas recording grants. Levies imposed in crises. Provincialization of the legionary corps over the first 2 centuries. Praetorian selectiveness. Monetary incentives, pay, donatives, discharge bonuses, and legal perks. Will-making, marriage rights later, land or cash at retirement. By dust the measuring rod is put away. The altar's coal glows down to a thoughtful red. The wax tablet holds a dozen new names that already feel like cohorts. You shoulder a bundle of state-issued kit that smells like new leather and old sweat, because nothing in the army is ever truly new. Tomorrow you will learn how to wear a shield without teaching your shoulder to hate you. Next week you will learn how to stand in a ditch without believing the sky did you wrong. The Empire has discovered something about you, that your pride can be trained into punctuality. You have discovered something about the Empire, that it pays on time often enough to keep a promise shiny. Somewhere a veteran puts his diploma back in its box and sleeps like a man who knows what an oath can do. You meet your equipment the way new roommates meet, awkward, heavy, and deciding who will bruise whom. The quartermaster walks you down a long table where Rome has laid out its arguments in wood, iron, leather, and habit. Standard kit is the Empire's secret tactic. Drills matter, but it's the sameness of tools that lets a cohort move like one body. Start with the head, because fear lives there. The helmet evolves on your scalp. Late Republic Montefortino and Cullis bowls give way under the Principate to Imperial Gallic and Imperial Italic types, raised ridges and embossed eyebrows, hinged cheek pieces, a flared neck guard that tells falling things to mind their manners. Some wear reinforcing crossbars. Many carry sockets where a crest can ride for parade. Centurions favor a transverse crest so a nervous recruit can find authority at a glance. It's a lighthouse of dyed horsehair telling you where calm stands. The fit matters. A felt liner, a strap under the jaw, and just enough space to turn a grimace into a grin after you survive something you won't describe over dinner. The body is a museum of metal choices. The old reliable is Larica humata, chain mail, thousands of interlinked rings that drape well, shrug off cuts, and accept repairs the way a grandmother accepts darning. Showier for some seasons is Larica segmentata, curved iron plates strapped like a puzzle around your torso, iconic on Trajan's column, lighter for the protection it offers but fussier to fit and fix. There is also Larica squamata, scale armor, overlapping metal scales that turn sunlight into a rumor. Each has a personality. Male forgives, segmentata sulks if neglected, scale preens and argues with salt air. You cinch a leather subarmalis under it all so the metal doesn't teach your shoulders new words. Now the thing you learn to love by lifting, the shield, the scutum. Republicans favored an oval. The early empire standardizes the big, rectangular, curved board, a laminated sandwich of thin wood strips glued cross-grained, canvased or leather-faced, edged in rawhide, with a proud iron boss, umbo, at the center and a vertical hand grip behind it. It is both wall and door, wall when overlapped with your neighbor's, door when you shove and step through. Painted insignia turn plywood into identity. A chipped thunderbolt means home in a storm. You practice presenting the edge to catch spears, angling the face to slide arrows, punching with the boss to make a stranger reconsider friendship. Hold it long enough and your left arm grows a second heartbeat. Weapons are a choreography. First in the dance is the pilum, the javelin with a wooden shaft and a long iron shank ending in a pyramidal tip, built to punch through shield, mail, and certainty. Many pila are designed to deform on impact, either by a softer shank or a clever ferrule, so they stick and drag, turning an enemy's shield into luggage. Some have small wooden pegs that shear, others simply bend and refuse to be thrown back. Depending on era and supply, you carry a heavy and a lighter pilum, learn their balance by feel, and wait for the horn that says the sky is briefly yours. Close work belongs to the gladius, the short sword with a talent for understatement. Born of Iberian tutors, refined into Mainz and then Pompey types, it rides low on your right hip, Baltius crossing the body, so you don't tangle it with the shield. It is for thrusting more than for grand arcs. 4 inches of decision under a rib beats a long poem every time. Later centuries will lengthen blades toward the spada as cavalry and looser fighting change the conversation, but in the cohort's prime the gladius speaks in short sentences and expects to be obeyed. A Pugio dagger keeps it company, invaluable for camp chores and awkward knots, less glamorous in battle than reenactors' hope. Feet and fabric matter because marches win wars. Caligy, hobnailed sandals, bite roads and leave maps of your day on marble floors. The tunic and sagum cloak are wool that remembers rain. The cingulum belt hangs with fittings that jingle like a small parade. A soldier who learns to wrap a cloak against crosswind forgives many emperors. The camp prefect insists you stitch your name into the hem. The quartermaster can spot a missing stitch the way a hawk spots a mouse. A Roman soldier is half carpenter, half porcupine. Strap to your cingulum and pack our tools that win more wars than swords. The delabra, pickmatic, for ditches and posts. A saw that knows the difference between green and seasoned wood. A short shovel, and issued on campaign, 2 or more suits, sharpened stakes for palisades. Your marching burden, the sarcina, rides on a forked pole, furca, a walkable clothesline from which dangle mess kit, spare sandals, rations, and opinions you will later swear you always held. The first thing you learn to build is a ditch. The second is respect for the man who taught you. Standardization is logistics in armor. When every shield is roughly the same size, the testudo, that famous tortoise, builds itself with practice. Front rank shields forward, next rank roofs them, third rank overlaps, and suddenly arrows lose their tantrum. When every pilum flies with similar weight and length, the first volley arrives like a chorus. When every gladius reaches the same distance beyond a wall of wood, the close-in work becomes a metronome. Officers can plan reliefs, rotations, and reserve punches because they know how far your arm will travel and how quickly your gear can be reset. Predictability here is not boredom, it's survival. Mainstream fact, tidy as a kit list. A typical early Imperial legionary carries helmet, types evolving from Montefortino/Cullis to Imperial Gallic/Italic, body armor, hamada, segmentata, or squamata depending on period and role. The large curved scutum, 1 or 2 pila, heavy/light in earlier empire, the gladius. Hispaniensis Mainz Pompey forms, later the spada, Pugio, Caligy, cingulum with metal fittings, cloak, sagum, marching. Sarcina with furca, entrenching tools, delabra, and palisade stakes, suits. A full marching load can hover around several tens of kilograms, enough to teach humility before noon. Quirky tidbit. The fittings on the soldier's belt often jingle, some say intentionally, so a century on the march sounds like money arguing with itself. Another, soldier's polished iron with oil and vinegar, a recipe that also keeps the mess kit free of yesterday's personality. A third, shield bosses and belt plaques become small art galleries. Men etch victories, initials, and rude truths that archaeologists later report in politely worded footnotes. Historians still argue whether Larica segmentata was truly the early empire's default, or a showy minority favored by certain legions and sculptors. Archaeology finds plenty of males surviving where segmentata rusted into anonymity. Reliefs love segmentata because plates photograph better in stone. They also wrangle about pilum engineering, where soft iron shanks and wooden pegs are universal, bending, design or workshop variations, and about exact weights. How heavy was the standard scutum, and how many pila did a man really carry on the worst day of the best plan? Light joke 1. The gladius is called short by men who have never learned how long a minute is at arm's length. Light joke 2. A recruit asks whether the Calighi hobnails are for traction. A veteran says they're for scaring accountants on marble floors. Light joke 3. The Delabra thinks it's a weapon and is correct twice a year. Tactics grow from kit the way vines grow from trellises. The pilum's heavy head means you throw once at the right moment, not 6 times to feel productive. The shield's curve means you present edge and face deliberately, catching blows on the boss and pushing like a patient door. The sword's length means you keep the line tight and your humor drier than your blade. Helmets with honest cheek pieces let you glance without courting dentistry. Armor that flexes lets you breathe enough to tell jokes later. Quiet ones, with eyes still wide. Maintenance is doctrine. After drill, you sit with awl and needle, strengthening shield edges with fresh rawhide while the signifer tells a story about a man who skimped and met a spear that did not. You oil the centurion's vitus because it pays to respect tools that might meet your back. You scrape the day out of your Calighi, dirt, nails, pride, and replace a hobnail before it teaches you about blisters. The armorer inspects pilum heads and complains that some men think iron is immortal. The clerk notes, who borrowed extra cord and hopes to see it again before Saturnalia. Quirky tidbit 2. Some helmets carry stamped maker's marks and unit codes, bureaucracy expressed as tiny art. Others bear dents hammered smooth, a diary written in steel. Cloaks double as blankets, tents, and bargaining chips. A good sagum can be traded for a goat in 3 provinces and a new friend in a 4th. The pugio is a can opener more often than a duel partner. The quartermaster does not read poetry about this. Historians still argue how much kit varied across provinces at one time. Britain coughs up segment ada. The Rhine loves mail. The East favors scale in some periods. Is that supply chain, climate, or fashion? They enjoy the belt debate too. Did the jingling fittings serve a purpose, cadence, signal, or vanity? And they sketch the scutum's dimensions through a century by measuring paint ghosts on plaster and stains on floors. Answers shift when a farmer turns a plow and ruins a scholar's weekend with a new find.by dusk. You buckle the last strap and feel the odd comfort that comes when everything is in its place. Heavy where it should be heavy, noisy where it should be noisy, familiar enough that your hands find the right latch in the dark. Standard kit won't make you brave, but it will make your bravery useful. Tomorrow the horn will tell you when to lift the shield and when to loose the pilum. The sameness of your gear means your century will move like a sentence with all its commas trained. You lie back, the scutum a curved horizon at your side, and let the camp's low metal murmurs polish your nerves into sleep. You wake before the horn because the ground has opinions and your back has heard them. The camp is still a low murmur, leather creaking, metal clearing its throat, when the prefectus castrorum points his vine staff at the eastern paling and the day begins to lengthen its stride. Drill is Rome's lullaby and alarm clock, the same movements, the same calls, until your muscles answer faster than your worries can phrase an objection. You don't train for heroics, you train to make heroics unnecessary. March 1st, because wars are mostly distances. The cornicin gives a rising note that tastes like vinegar on an empty stomach, standards tilt, and your cohort steps into a pace that has learned to prefer 5 to the hour. At first the tyro marches 10 miles, then 12, then the full day with the pack that feels like a small, unhelpful friend on your shoulders. The Sarcina bites less after a week. By the 2nd month you measure land in songs rather than in blisters. Left, right, is childish, Rome teaches. Steady even, and the road obeys. A centurion counts quietly, first to set cadence, later to set example, and you begin to hear the line breathe like a bellows rather than a collection of arguments. Mainstream fact you can take to the weighing table. Our most explicit handbook, Vegetius, epitome Rei Militaris, late 4th century, insists recruits march in step with the standards, 10 miles, then 12, in 5 hours, carry full kit, and graduate to longer tests. He prescribes weapons drill with wooden swords heavier than the real thing and wicker shields twice the weight of battle boards, so the field feels lighter than the practice yard. He writes late, but much of what he describes smells like older custom: running, jumping, ditching, swimming, and the daily discipline of erecting a marching camp whether or not bedtime begs for mercy. The weapons yard is a shallow square of packed earth that remembers thousands of bad mornings and forgives you all. Weighted rudis, practice swords, thud against straw dummies fixed on stakes. The wicker shields laugh at your wrists until your wrists learn to laugh back. You practice the Roman way, which is the short way: guard up, 3 quick thrusts under an imaginary rib, half step, return, guard. The centurion says a slash is for men who like scars more than victories. You believe him when he makes you repeat the thrust until your shoulders hum like well-tuned lyres. Pila follow, balance, 2 short steps, overhand casts with the whole body, not just the arm. Then recover, because a soldier who does not recover is a story someone else tells. Quirky tidbit: some training grounds sprinkle sand thicker in the fall zone, so bruises teach the lesson rather than the skull. Others set up Paulus posts, the same sort gladiators use. Stout wooden pillars that accept 1,000 cuts each morning and never complain, except to leave splinters in men who get sloppy. Another, the cohort's jest master swears the straw dummies learn your name and duck accordingly. The armorer, who repairs their hides, replies that straw is braver than some recruits and charges less. You practice formation changes until the ground could do them alone. Line into column, column into line, rear sentries through the front without turning the cohort into embroidery. The horn means one thing at one pitch and another a heartbeat higher. Flags say similar truths to men too far to hear brass. The signifer lifts his animal, boar, bull, hand me that wolf, while the aquilifer keeps the eagle steady in your peripheral vision. You learn to love the edge of your neighbor's scutum. The overlap is shelter, the gap is gossip for arrows. Relief drills teach choreography under pressure, front rank fights, second weights, then the hand squeeze left to right and the low bark, and the second line steps through the space you swear didn't exist a breath ago. Light joke 1. A tyro asks why the testudo is called a tortoise if it's so fast. A veteran says because the gods like jokes that shelter you. Light joke 2. The centurion asks how long you can hold your shield. A recruit says, until lunch. The centurion extends lunch by an hour and calls it character. Light joke 3. The cornisan claims his horn frightens barbarians. The tubusan replies it only frightens men who forget their left. Drill includes what poets avoid: shovels. Every day ends with a ditch, rampart, and a gate that knows its name: Porta Praetoria toward the enemy, Porta Decumana at the rear, because habit builds fortresses where sleep would build regrets. A line of men with the labri can move a hillock in the time it takes a politician to say, victory. You measure progress in baskets and insults. The camp prefect measures it in angles, and the optio measures it in how little he has to shout by the 3rd week. Historians still argue whether the army always dug every night in calm zones or sometimes slept under the pure sky. The safe version is that when it mattered, the ditch happened, because generals who skip trenches get remembered by other people's adjectives. Your training calendar spins across more than blades. Running in armor until your lungs understand the weight. Jumping ditches with shield and pilum to teach legs encourage the same grammar. Swimming rivers while the mule track lurches toward a ford too far downstream. A cohort that can swim can surprise. A cohort that cannot is a list of names on wetwood. The Medici oversee sanitation drill. Latrines properly sited, hands washed in vinegar water, camp refuse moved beyond the complaints of gods and noses. A soldier who avoids dysentery wins more fights than a soldier who writes great letters home. The doctor says this softly and is not wrong. Mock combats spice the week like pepper you didn't pay for. Two cohorts meet in a planned insult. Blunted javelins, reed bundles for shields, rules that pretend to be rules. Officers watch for cohesion and timing. The primus pilus watches for the one man whose eyes widen rather than narrow when the line closes. A good mock fight ends with bruises and a centurion's satisfied grunt. A great one ends with new jokes about the losing standard's resemblance to a very tired chicken. Sometimes the legate rides the perimeter, face giving away nothing, then dismounts to correct a spacing with his boot. You exchange glances and decide to believe this is affection. Mainstream aside, crisp as a command, Vegetius' program includes daily armatura, weapons practice, with heavier gear, frequent route marches, running, jumping, swimming, entrenching, artillery drill for ballistae and scorpions crews, and practice building camps. He prescribes target practice for pila and slings, and insists soldiers learn to cut wood, carry burdens, and endure heat and cold. Earlier sources, Caesar's casual mentions, Josephus' admiring passages about Roman discipline, harmonize with the picture. The legion's edge is routine turned into instinct. Historians still argue whether Vegetius, writing after the classic legion's heyday, is describing an idealized past or a late Roman program he wishes the present would imitate. Did early imperial legions routinely use heavier training swords and shields? Or is that a retrospective analogy from gladiator schools and later practice? The archaeology of training grounds is shy. The literary evidence smiles politely and refuses to swear. Most agree that whatever the precise weights, repetition and standardization are the true weight lifters. Signals become a second language. The tuba's straight bark, the corner's curve, the buccina's reedy calls at the watch change. Each lifts your feet a fraction of a heartbeat faster with each week. Standard bearers drill hand signals for dust and noise. Forward, oblique, close, open, while officers ride the line to translate general intent into local geometry. You stop thinking of commands as orders and start thinking of them as habits the air whispers through you. When a formation pivots on a horn note and the sun flashes along a row of bosses, you feel something like religion. Quirky tidbit 2. Some cohorts keep cadence with call and response chants on long slogs, half practical, half mischief, trading insults about meals, cooks, and prefects' shoes. A grinning optio allows it as long as the step stays true. Another. Practice targets sometimes carry rough painted faces of enemy kings that suspiciously resemble last year's quartermaster. The quartermaster finds this touching and doubles the vinegar ration. Discipline frames the day without always raising its voice. Miss a step, repeat the stretch. Let your scutum droop. Hold it higher while the centurion counts to a number that feels personal. Lose the watchword. Spend a week moving dirt for the latrini. Decimation is a memory told at night to remind you that we matters more than I, but good units rarely hear its footsteps. Rewards have their own drill. The corona moralis for first over a wall, the vine staff gently tapping a man's shoulder in praise, extra leave to bathe longer than envy considers decent. The cohort learns to crave the nod more than the shout. Historians still argue how evenly such training blanketed the empire. Did legions in Syria drill differently from those in Britain because heat and rivers reorder priorities? Did quiet provinces grow lax while frontier armies sharpened daily? Inscriptions praise discipline everywhere. The dirt tells varied stories. The safest answer is that Rome's system expected sameness and tolerated local weather, which is also how it ran law and bred. By dusk, the practice yard smells of dust, sweat, and iron, a perfume you will someday swear you miss. Your shoulders ache in a way that predicts sleep. Your hand closes around the gladius hilt without asking first. Your feet find the tent ropes in the dark because this morning's drill taught them where not to trip. Light joke 4. A comrade says he can now march in his dreams. You tell him to try it with the sarcina and report back. Light joke 5. The cornicean brags he can make a cohort run backward with 3 notes. The centurion says he can do it with 2 words and a look. Light joke 6. The straw dummy finally falls over. The Opio awards it a week's rations. You turn in, and the camp hums at a frequency that sounds like competence. Low talk, oil on buckles, a file against a nicked edge, the distant thunk of a stake persuaded too far left into a more reasonable position. Drill has not made you brave. It has made your courage predictable, which is the kind the man to your right can use. Tomorrow the horn will say armatura again, and your body will answer before your doubts put on their sandals. That is Rome's real trick, to teach you to move correctly when thinking would be too slow. You arrive at the day's last milestone, and the legate raises 2 fingers. The road exhales. The cohort does not. Drill has trained your feet to keep moving while your hands change jobs. Shields go from walls to wheelbarrows. The delabra comes out with a pleased little sigh. Stakes, suits, clatter down like a wooden argument that has already won. Sunset can wait. The camp cannot. Rome's rule is simple. If you want to sleep, you build it. The mensors, surveyors, trot ahead with groma and measuring rods, faces set in the expression of men who lay out squares against hills that hate geometry. First the rectangle, corners staked, sides paced. Playing card, corners rounded because right angles tear tents and patience. The prefectorial voice cuts the fading light. Porta Praetoria faces the enemy or the road forward. Porta Decumana the rear. Porta Principalis dextra and sinistra to either side. A central spine, Via Praetoria, runs from front gate to the commander's tent. Via Principalis crosses it before the Praetorium. Behind that, Via Quintana parallels the Principalis. It's a little city you can fold into a pack at dawn, but tonight it will be avenues and order. Mainstream fact you can recite while shoveling. Ancient writers from Polybius to Josephus describe Roman marching camps as standardized rectangles with a ditch, fossa, rampart, agger, palisade, vallum, and a street grid, Via Praetoria, Via Principalis, Via Quintana. With the Praetorium in the interior and unit streets arrayed by cohort and century. Hyginus Grammaticus, the surveyor, later gives layouts. That smell of experience and ink. Archaeology obliges. Temporary camps from Scotland to the Rhine show classic playing card plans traced by aerial crop marks. Faint green ghosts of foxed evenings like this one. Your century peels off to its assigned slice of earth, because habit sleeps best in familiar places. The first cohort close to the Praetorium, artillery park off the Quintana, cavalry ala hugging a gate for speed, baggage inside the perimeter but out of anyone's way. The Optio, carrying his beloved list and a stick that finds straight lines and crooked men, paces out the intervalum, that clear strip inside the rampart where no tent encroaches and surprise fires do not eat the whole night. He taps the stake line. You and 7-10 mates unload the contubernium's canvas and poles, already arguing about which 2 will be unlucky enough to sleep by the door. Ditch first. The fossa bites into the ground with a rhythm that mixes breath and insult. Soil piles inward to raise the agger. The vallum stakes hammer along the crest in metronomic spats. Your delabra forgets it is a tool and believes it is theology. The centurion's vitus reminds rubber wrists that doctrine requires orthodoxy. Before long a low earth wall circles the rectangle, wooden teeth bristling, less a castle than a promise, but enough to make raiders look at the next hillside instead. When the Optio calls, "Depth," you hit the measure because we measured it this morning. When he says, "Steeper," you hear, "Sleep longer." Quirky tidbit. Some units notch their stakes with tiny marks to keep pilfering honest. 3 grooves for the 2nd century, wolf scratches for the 5th. Another, Certain cohorts swear by garlic garlands hung at tent flaps as the god's own insecticide. The Medici roll their eyes, but they let the garlands stay because men who think they are protected sleep better and fewer snores mean fewer quarrels. Streets appear from simple rules. Viae trampled into firmness by Calighi hobnails, drainage ditches nibbled along their edges, water channels sluicing gray from the cook fires that already dream of lentils and first cuts. The praetorium rises as a square of taller posts and better manners. The legate's table will host maps and a quiet appeal case while the cornicularius, chief clerk, bullies wax tablets into obedience. The questorium, the pay and supplies corner, gets extra pickets and a small shrine because coin behaves when watched. The forum of our little city is an open square where orders announce themselves and rumors audition. Water first, always. The aquifer sends a detail to the spring with barrels and guard. No one drinks until the medicus approves the source and assigns the boiling pits. Latrines go downwind and downhill beyond the fossa. Trenches deep enough to spare noses, discreet screens to spare dignity. A tesserarius posts a sign reminding Neils and men to keep to their assigned corners. Kitchens bloom in orderly rows, fire pits sunk to the right depth so sparks don't test the vellum. A baker's squad stacks portable ovens, clay domes that bake tomorrow's ration bread and tonight's optimism. Historians still argue whether legions built the full fortified camp every single night, even on peaceful marches. Some insist the fossa/vellum ritual was near daily doctrine. Others argue for graded effort, stakes and watchlines in friendly country, full rampart when danger pricked hair. The archaeology shows both habits: lightweight footprints along calm roads, earthworks with veteran shoulders in hostile zones. Sensible officers spent sweat where the map advised, not where manuals bragged. As tents rise, the camp's music changes key. Hammers become laughter. The buccina calls the watch bill. The tessera, the wooden token bearing the knight's password, circulates from the tribunes down through centurions to tesserarii and finally to the mouths of sentries who will repeat it at the point of a spear if need requires. Countersign and challenge drill again, because nothing ruins sleep like a nervous man at the Porta Principalis inventing new Latin in a hurry. For watches carve the night, each gate gets posts, each via patrol, the XQB, outposts beyond the ditch, settle with cloaks pulled tight, spears upright, and jokes kept to whispers. Inside the lines, order masquerades as comfort. Each contubernium digs a shallow drainage trench around the tent. Kit racks against the canvas keep gear dry. Shields lean in a tidy row like obedient turtles. The armorer strolls, eyes catching loose rivets that would rather escape tomorrow than today. The signifer plants the cohort standard on its stand and touches it as if to check the pulse. On the Via Quintana the artillery crews lay their scorpions and ballistae on tarps, lash arms and triggers, and cover with hides in case rain decides to disprove forecasts. A mule debates a stake and loses. A groom praises the gods of knots. Light joke 1. The Prefectus Castrorum says the ditch is too shallow. The Optio replies the prefect is too tall. The century digs faster and taller men stop smirking. Light joke 2. A tyro asks why the intervalum must stay clear. The centurion says because fire likes tents as much as you do. Light joke 3. A sentry forgets the watchword, offers straw dummy, and is sentenced to escort the straw dummy on patrol. The gates get personality. At the Porta Praetoria, the beneficiarius lays a tidy table for permits, passes, and the polite fiction that merchants never overcharge soldiers. The Porta Decumana hosts the quiet business. Supply carts in late, refuse carts out earlier, a lone courier with a diploma flashing ivory who wants a fresh meal and a bowl of something that used to be stew. At the two Principales gates, pickets flex fingers and whisper the countersign to passing patrols who reply with the second half of a proverb. Horn calls mark watch changes. The buccina's reedy voice slices hours into obedience. Mainstream detail, steady as a rope. The camp's interior plan assigns streets by unit, tents by contubernium, with a clear interval often around 60 to 100 feet, inside the rampart for circulation and safety. Latrines outside the rampart, kitchens placed to avoid smoke and fire hazards, the commander's tent facing the Via Praetoria, tribunals and shrines near the Praetorium, artillery parks and baggage zones marked. Passwords, tesserae, distributed daily, for night watches, posted sentry lists with penalties severe for sleep, up to death in strict times, though good officers preferred humiliation to headcount loss. Quirky tidbit 2, some contubernia keep a communal lucky stone, a smooth river pebble passed across the threshold each night. To bring the river with us. Nobody believes it works, and everyone touches it anyway. Another, a few legions stamp their tent pegs. Archaeologists now coo over pegs like scholars over sonnets. Historians still argue how much individuality soldiers brought to this standard plan. Regional tweaks in Britain's reign versus Syria's dust. Cavalry heavy columns carving crescents instead of rectangles when ground insisted. They also gnawed the bone of whether artillery always sat inside the quintana or sometimes in forward pockets behind the Praetoria gate. Surviving earthworks suggest flexibility that manuals translate into certainty. Dark thickens, the camp brightens. Lamps beat along the Via Principalis. The Praetorium glows like a thought that refuses sleep. You eat hot porridge with a streak of oil and a shred of pig, taste ash that somehow improves the flavor, and argue softly about whether tomorrow's march will break before or after the ford. The Tesserarius makes his rounds, a small god of passwords and punctuality, checking posts, whispering the countersign, recording in his tablet which sentry stood straight and which one owes an optio the courtesy of change. Light joke 4. A baker boasts his ovens make better walls than the vallum. The camp prefect replies the ovens can try the night watch and see. Light joke 5. The aquilifer wraps the eagle in cloth and says it snores. The signifer says that's the treasury chest. Light joke 6. The muleteer claims the Via Quintana was named after his fifth mule. The surveyor says that joke is older than the Groma. You lie down, finally, and the earth feels less hostile for having been persuaded into shapes you recognize. The ditch and rampart are not high, the stakes are not invincible, but together they change the night from a risk to a routine. That is the Roman gift, to make protection a habit. Tomorrow the horn will lift you, the stakes will come up, the Via will become road again, and by dusk, on another hill, the same rectangle will grow like a practice prayer. The straw dummy you bullied this morning will be laughing somewhere in the baggage, and the garlic will pretend to keep its promises. Between you and the dark stands a line of men who built their own sleep and then guarded it. You close your eyes, and the camp murmurs like a city that loves schedules. Before the sun chooses a side, sound chooses it for you. The camp's first breath is brass. The buccina's reedy curl for the watch change. The straight tuba for assembly, the circular corner for movements with more geometry than conversation. You feel the order slide down your spine before your ears finish translating. Rome did not invent shouting. Rome invented telling 5,000 men to step left at the same heartbeat without breaking into opinions. You learn the voices early. The tuba is the drill sergeant, straight, loud, uncomplicated, good for. Form up, advance, halt. The simple verbs that keep sandals agreeing. The cornu, a G-shaped bronze ribbon with a crossbar to rest on the shoulder, wraps its calls around dust and distance. Wheeling, obliquing, opening or closing intervals, the things a cohort must do while still looking like a single sentence. The buccina, think C-shaped, readier, handles camp housekeeping, watches, fatigue details, the signal that tells 1,000 small chores to pretend they are one. Cavalry have their own curved darling, the lichuus, a shriller cousin that makes horses decide that obedience is very fashionable today. Mainstream fact you can trust over noise. Polybius, Book 6, describes standards and horns signals coordinating maniples and watches. Josephus admires the Roman habit of using trumpet calls to begin work, drill, meals, and guard changes. Vegetius later itemizes trumpet functions and insists recruits learn to interpret calls without looking. Standards, signa, provide the lion's eyes, horns provide its legs. Together they convert will into choreography. Standards are not decorations, they are gravity. At your cohort's heart the signum rises, staff shod in bronze, topped with open hand or spear point, discs, and wreaths along the shaft naming battles or benefactions, a crescent here, a phallera there. The signifer carries it with a strap across his chest and a face that says he knows where your courage is parked. Beside him, when the full legion must remember itself, the Aquila rides, the eagle, silver or gold, wings out, thunder condensed to a bird. The Aquilifer's pelt, often a wolf or lion, spills over his helmet so you can find the heart in the storm. Lose the eagle and you lose more than metal. You lose the rumor that tomorrow will look like today. The standard's cousins fill out the family. A vexillum, a square of dyed cloth on a crossbar, marks detachments and speaks in color when dust eats the horizon. The imago, the emperor's portrait carried by the imaginifer, reminds you that the oath has a face. Later, the Draco windsock, mouth agate, bronze head gulping wind so the silk tube snakes behind, hisses over cavalry and auxiliary lines like a pet storm. Each has a bearer with a pay bump and a target painted by fate. Each is a moving address for orders, rally, and pride. Historians still argue whether the Draco became common in legions only in the 2nd, 3rd centuries, Dacian or Sarmatian influence flowing into Roman ranks, or whether it trickled in earlier around cavalry units and then spread. They also debate how standardized the call repertoire was. Did a will write sound the same on the Rhine and in Syria, or did local dialects of brass persist? Vegetius dreams of uniformity. Reality probably hummed in regional keys. Signals in battle are a duet of sight and sound. On the left, dust eats distance. The cornicen lifts a note, half blast to close intervals, and the signifer dips the signum to the right. A silent verb your line obeys because practice made it familiar. On the right, the vexillum rises and tilts twice. The cohort there has seized a low ridge and needs you to dress on it. The eagle stays steady, a promise that the center is still the center. When relief comes, front centuries slipping back through the second line, the cornu sings the two-note. Pass through, and your neighbor's shield brushes yours exactly as it did on the practice yard when the dummy didn't duck. Camp life runs on a gentler score. First watch ends to the bacina. The tesserarius passes the knight's password around the fire circles again. Wooden tessera in his palm, word on his tongue, and sentries rehearse challenge and countersign until nerves calm down and memory stands up. Meal calls stretch men into lines before cauldrons. Fatigue details step off to cut steaks with a note that makes the delabra feel inevitable. Assembly rings out before speeches, pay, punishments, and pardons. If the legate wants attention that does not leak, the tuba repeats the note, and the camp holds its breath politely. Quirky tidbit. Some cornua and tubi use removable bone or boxwood mouthpieces. The best players carried their own like precious teeth, and swore they tasted of olive oil and victories. Another, musicians, tubacines, cornicines, buccinators, held immune status, exempt from some fatigue, partly because lips that dig ditches all day refuse to hit the high notes at dusk. The optio calls this respect for art. Grinning. Standards have altars as well as carriers. On the calends of January you and the whole legion swear the sacramentum again. Right hands up, eyes on the signa, and the imaginifer's portrait drinks incense. Sacrifices mark victories, promotions, and the occasional need to apologize to Mars for a muddy parade. The Aedes Signorum, the standard shrine in a permanent fortress, smells of oil and old wreaths. In the marching camp a simpler stand does the job, But men still touch the sockets like doorposts of a house that has traveled with them for years. Light joke 1. A new Tubison misses a pitch and a century wheels when it should open, the centurion says. Either tune the horn or learn to write apologies. Light joke 2. A signifer claims his discs shine brighter than the sun. The aquilifer replies the sun is cheaper to polish. Light joke 3. A sentry challenges the prefectus castrorum in the dark, forgets the countersign, and blurts, "Eagle." The prefect says, "Close enough, now remember tomorrow." The standards cult matters because memory is a weapon. After Teutoburg, when Varus lost 3 eagles to the forest, 9c, Germanicus later recovered them in parts. One from the Bructeri, another from the Chauci, the last under Caligula. Each return paraded like a limb rejoined. Augustus bragged about regaining standards from Parthia by diplomacy. The Prima Porta cuirass tells the story on marble like a press release you can wear. In short, metal birds carry long shadows. Signal flags make an underrated appearance when noise fails. Vexilla in red, blue, or dyed with whatever a quartermaster could bully from a merchant, wave in codes that the cohorts Optio and Centurion read at a glance. Forward, refuse flank, slow. When the cursus publicus kicks up dust with couriers, a vexillum planted by the Via Principalis tells the legate his desk has found him. Standards planted low on their points, signa inclinata, mean, hold, tip forward, advance, lifted shoulder high. Dress on me. You don't memorize a doctrine, you memorize a dance. Historians still argue whether each century had its distinctive discs and emblems by regulation or if workshops improvised blazons that later antiquarians mistook for strict heraldry. Painted shield motifs, lightning, thunderbolts, wreaths, capricorns, change across decades and provinces. Some think legions standardized under emperors, others see proud mess of local traditions layered with imperial fashion. The dirt yields fragments, the stones yield reliefs, the truth weaves between. Sometimes sound saves men from their own bravery. Pursuit is delicious and deadly. The cornu barks the recall, staccato, unmistakable, and the signum halts as if suddenly heavy. Good troops obey the note as if it were thirst. Bad troops ignore it and learn that night falls faster when you chase into it. In sieges, the tubas set calls pace the day, 3rd hour for rations to the ramp, 6th for rotating the testudo crews, 9th for hauling fresh water to the towers. Artillery takes its own beat, a ballista captain raises a hand, counts fingers, and the Scorpio lines loose like punctuation. Quirky tidbit too. Some later Dracons had bronze whistles in the mouth so the wind made a low howl when the tube filled, part terror, part morale, part problem for horses. Another, the imaginator's portrait could be wax or gilded relief. In summer heat wax faces quietly changed expression, leading to jokes about the emperor's mood improving around lunchtime. The password, tessera, is a standard you can speak. Distributed from tribunes down the line at dusk, it changes nightly. Challenge. "'Cuz?" Beats countersign whispered like gossip. The wrong answer gets a spear held like a question mark. Sentries count stars to stay awake. The tesserarius counts sentries. The watchword travels by token in some units, by written slip in others, by memory where officers trust lungs and loyalty. Forget, and you learn how cold the intervalum breeze can feel while holding a shield for an extra hour. Light joke 4. A cornicean boasts he can make rain stop with a certain note. The sky obliges and the centurion promotes him to weather officer with a shovel. Light joke 5. A vexillarius ties his flag too low and trips. The cohort votes to call that maneuver the new oblique. Light joke 6. The imaginator says the emperor's portrait smiles at him. The signifer says that's because he's standing near the pay chest. Mainstream detail, steady as a beat, musicians were classed among immunes. Standards had designated shrines in permanent forts. Loss of standards was prosecuted with ferocity. Recovered eagles paraded. The triad of horns, tuba, cornu, buccina, map to battlefield, maneuver, and camp signals. Signal flags and hand signs supplemented sound. Later adoption of the Draco spread from auxiliary/cavalry to broader use. The Imago emphasized the oath's personal focus on the Emperor. You sleep better for knowing what the air means. Assert in 2 notes at midnight and you roll from cloak to post without wondering why. A certain dip of the signum in dust and your feet close the interval while your mind is still naming yesterday's town. The point of signals and standards is not magnificence, though they wear it well, it is predictability. When brass and silk and silver agree, 10,000 people stop being an argument and start being a plan. You roll onto your side, somewhere a cornicin oils a mouthpiece and a signifer checks a strap, and you trust both men more than luck. You step onto ground that has opinions, tufts, ruts, a shallow fold where rain once argued with clay, and you feel the cohort settle around you like a coat that knows your shoulders. Tactics here are not grand speeches about glory. They are a series of tidy, rehearsed impolitenesses performed at the right time. Rome's trick is to make the right thing the easy thing and then do it until even fear gets bored. The line forms in 3 breaths. First breath, the signifer plants you. The first 2 centuries, front line, locked shields, feet set a blade's width behind the board so shoves move more shield than shin. Second breath, the next 2 centuries take the second rank, 2 paces back, eyes on the gaps they'll inherit. Third breath, the rear pair hold 5 to 8 paces behind, equal parts reserve and rumor killers. Cohorts left and right dress on you. The eagle sits back where it can be seen but not used as decoration. The legate's staff ride the seam and behave like they love dust. Mainstream fact, as steady as a boss rivet. By the early and high empire the tactical building block in open battle is the cohort. Caesar regularly deploys cohorts as maneuver units, e.g., Gaul and the Civil Wars, and imperial practice cements it. Cohorts operating shoulder to shoulder, with internal relief and a designated reserve line behind the engaged front. The century remains the centurion's canvas, but the cohort is the painter's hand. In Latin you hear aces, line, subsidia, reserves, rorarii and other antique names vanish into memory. What stays is the habit of rotating fresh men forward before fatigue becomes a decision maker. The opening chord is pila. On the cornu's cup note, front ranks step into the shallow downhill your surveyor promised and throw, overhand, whole shoulder, point first as gravity's argument. You keep one eye on the standard, one on your neighbor's elbow, and none on the other fellow's face because sympathy is for after. The first volley makes noise, the second makes choices, shields drag, mail sags, front lines lose their posture. Then the test for the cohort's pulse. Can you cover the last 6 paces without turning into a crowd? That small, mean distance where the ground remembers footprints is where formations either earn their wages or write letters. Close work is more grocery list than poem. Shield high, edge angled. Half step, short thrust. Wait forward, don't chase your blade. Pull, half step back, breathe. Your second rank leans in with spear ends and cruel opinions. When the centurion's vine staff taps the rim, the relief happens. Front 2 men of each file hinge back through the tiny door you've practiced 100 times. Second rank becomes first. A fresh pair plug the line. Nobody shouts except the brass. 3 heartbeats later and the cohort looks as if nothing happened, which is the compliment Rome wants. Light joke 1. Your neighbor mutters that if the enemy would listen to the horn calls this would be much tidier. Light joke 2, the centurion says. Short thrusts. And someone in the rear quips, like your patience, which earns him an extra hour of shield holding later. Education with props. Light joke 3. The opto in the back says he can tell who's about to break by how their calves talk. You suggest he open a clinic. Cohorts earn their bread in the hinge. See your left begin to bow? The legate sends a runner with teeth like a question, and the reserve cohort slides obliquely, adds sinistram, to stiffen that flank, shields overlapping where fear wanted to open a door. On the right, cavalry shadow your edge. The auxiliary archers, lean Syrians with a grudge against wind, shade your advance in a slow rain of feathers. You are the anvil, they are the air hammer. The smith is a horse who hates poetry. Terrain is a co-author. The cohort likes gentle slopes crowned by your shields, ditches behind the enemy rather than in front of you, and a left-to-right wind so javelins fly slightly kinder. In woods, the sentries open intervals to avoid becoming sculpture. In rough ground, the second line sits closer so relief doesn't trip. In fog, signals matter more than heroes. Against chariots or heavy cavalry, you cheat with physics, narrow your frontage, thicken ranks, angle the first two files inward to make a set of teeth in the grass, pila held like rude hedges. Horses prefer not to solve Euclid at speed. If they break off, your Velite's spiritual descendants, auxiliary light infantry, harass the retreat with small, accurate unkindness. Historians still argue whether Romans in the High Empire habitually fought as an actual shield wall, in the later medieval sense, continuous locked boards with minimal gaps, or in looser files with controlled spaces for thrusts and rotation. Relief drills and the big scuta suggest close order. Some depictions and practicalities suggest breathing room. They also squint at the wedge cuneus formation, used rarely by legionaries as a shock point, or mainly a barbarian favorite the Romans countered. The literary evidence lets both parties keep buying ink. Coordination extends beyond your nose. The legate's order of battle is a map of bets, a strong center with two cohorts refused back on the threatened wing. A hand-picked cohort has coerced Praetoria to plug the absolute worst hole. A cavalry reserve poised for the now that a good commander conjures. Once contact starts, the line crawls. Blisters of advance, towels of give, and the cornicines stitch it together with notes the dead never hear. If an enemy line breaks in folds rather than in holes, pursuit patrols push just far enough to keep shame fresh but not far enough to meet the surprise. The recall sounds like disappointment. Obeying it sounds like living. Quirky tidbit, caltrops, tribuli, sometimes travel in sacks with the artillery and get scattered in front of likely cavalry lanes. They look like children's jacks until a hoof finds one and philosophy ensues. Another. Some cohorts chalk the top edges of shields before battle. When the crush comes and dust makes everyone the same color, a flash of white helps you keep your place in a moving wall. Artillery plays punctuation. Ballistae lob bolts or stones over your head to where the enemy reserves are trying to decide if the front line is lying. Scorpions spit iron quarrels into dense targets that forgot to be nervous. You hear their work more than you see it, an ugly buzzy sigh, and you learn to trust their crews the way children trust bakers. The results arrive, hot and on time. In defensive fights, the cohort stands behind a low fieldwork, hasty ditch, thrown vallum, stakes in front, and becomes a patient hedgehog until orders invent a reason to move. Mainstream aside, short enough to remember while breathing hard, legionaries often fought in 2 or 3 lines of cohorts, with a third held back as general reserve. Signal flags and horn calls synchronized reliefs. Auxilia, archers, slingers, cavalry. Extended reach and covered flanks. The controlled pursuit doctrine. Prized cohesion over kills. Disciplined recall trumped glorious scattering. Josephus marveled at Roman order. Tacitus both praised and mocked it. Relief drilling is attested enough that even skeptics concede its habit. Fatigue is the real enemy. Reserves are the antidote. Your centurion watches faces more than wounds. When eyes widen and shoulders tense, he trades files before courage bleeds into clumsiness. The rear rank rotates forward to blood its edge. A fresh cohort edges in on the right where the enemy line, pinched by pila-ruined shields, gathers the look of men contemplating retirement. The primus pilus of the legion strolls behind with the menacing leisure of someone who knows exactly how wide the gap must be before he cares and exactly which two words will fix it. Light joke 4. The cornisant says his recall is a love song. A cavalryman says it's an insult to his saddle. Light joke 5. An archer says he can curve a shot. A slinger says he can curve an archer. Light joke 6. The signifer swears his standard is heavier in battles that matter. The optio replies all battles matter when you're carrying the baggage list. When the enemy line stiffens rather than melts, you change verbs. Stop pushing, start pinning. Let the archers and scorpions do work. Send a vexillation around a fold to nibble at the rear. Or you swap fronts. Pull the engaged cohort 2 paces back through the second line. Throw Pila again into men who thought they were finished with decisions, and take the 6 paces afresh. Nerves hate surprises scheduled. Rome schedules them anyway. Historians still argue about battlefield hand signals described in later sources. How codified were they earlier? How universal across provinces? And about how often legions adopted open order to absorb missiles before closing. Some reconstruct detailed playbooks. Others caution that good commanders improvise within a stable grammar: pila, close, relieve, reserve, recall. The argument is old and courteous. Both sides agree the legion's edge was less magic than muscle memory supervised by adults. The endgame is the moment nobody will admit they were waiting for. The enemy's line blurs at one seam, then two. The corner lifts the pursuit's first note, and immediately the recall's second waits in its shadow. You give a measured 3 paces, for a thrust, a shout you'd be embarrassed to hear sober, and then you stop because the cohort stops. The standard tilts back like a man putting his cup down. The line dresses as if for inspection. The reserve steps up to prevent drama. Somewhere an officer with good dice will write a report calling this stability. Quirky tidbit 2. Some commanders carried a scarlet cloak, or raised a scarlet banner as the general signal for attack now, vexillum purpureum as shorthand for decision. Another, a legion's nickname, could sneak into tactics. The Thunderers claimed it never rained on their right. Pure coincidence. Frequent smugness. By dusk you can read the field the way bakers read loaves. Here the Pila did their work. Shredded wicker, bent shanks. There the reliefs went smooth, few bodies, scuffed dust like a braid. Over there, a foolish pursuit and a merciful recall. The cohort counts quietly, present, wounded, missing, and the signifer adds the tally to the standard's private weight. The legate drafts praise and clarity in the same paragraph. The prefectus castrorum says tomorrow's camp will be on the ridge where the water is less opinionated. You adjust a bent boss, share stale jokes with the man whose elbow you trusted, and realize the best tactics feel like chores done well. Rome wins with lines that remember how to be lines when the fun starts. The day's grammar is simple enough to write on a shield rim: throw, step, press, finish, stop. The pilum is the comma that breaks the other man's sentence. The gladius is the period. Everything you drilled becomes a choreography you could dance in the dark. A few paces to settle your feet. A breath when the cornu curls the right note. 2 short steps, and the cast that sends iron and certainty forward together. You don't aim at faces. You aim at choices, shields, the space between 2 friends, the place where an officer is about to be important. The best throw is one that turns a line into luggage. A pilum feels odd until it doesn't. Wooden shaft, long iron shank, pyramidal point. The weight lies forward like a thought that insists. Some are heavy, some lighter, but both want your whole body, hips, shoulder, wrist, to agree before they leave your hand. On practice days you learn to keep the point traveling as if the air were thicker than it is. On real days you learn not to admire your throw. The old tales about soft iron shanks bending, wooden pegs shearing so the weapon droops and can't be returned. Yes, you've seen both. You've also seen Pila punch through wicker and leather and lodge across forearm, and would so a shield becomes a door that won't shut. A man who must choose between dropping his shield and dragging a spear begins to bargain with outcomes. Bargaining is bad for formations. Mainstream fact: sturdy enough to lean on, Roman infantry typically carried 1 or 2 pila in the early empire, often distinguished as heavy and light. Designs varied over time and by workshop. Long iron shanks riveted to the wooden shaft, some with a small wooden peg intended to shear on impact, others with malleable iron to bend, so enemies couldn't throw them back easily. The volley usually preceded the charge by a brief rush to close the distance while the enemy line was adjusting shields and posture. Close combat relied on the gladius, short, double-edged but optimized for thrust, used behind the large curved scutum in a compact, drilled rhythm of jab and cover. Timing is the tactic you can't polish but you can practice. Too soon, and the pila fall with more theater than effect. Too late, and their arc flattens into a clatter. The cues are not mystical. How far you can see the grain of the enemy's shields, whether their first ranks are still fresh or already bracing, the pitch of your cornison's call. You watch the standard dip, you feel the second rank stiffen to receive your step back, and you cast. Hundreds of iron voices speak together. What they say is, "Now." Your feet answer with the 6 paces that separate missiles from neighbors. The close is less gallant than polite. Your scutum edge overlaps your neighbor's, boss forward, knees loose. The first thrust is short, under the rim into the soft compromise between rib and ambition. The second, if needed, angles higher when a man lifts his chin to shout. The third only if the first 2 were arguments rather than conclusions. You do not hack. You do not windmill. Your centurion's vine staff would interrupt to correct the form. When pressure builds, you work the board. Small shoves and heel digs. The boss punching to create half a palm of air for the next thrust. A twist of the left wrist to slide spearheads away as if you were a doorman with standards. You learned this in the yard with weighted shields. You believe in it now because your wrist is still attached. Light joke 1. A recruit asks how long a thrust should be. The centurion says, "Long enough to make a new friend and short enough to keep the old ones." Light joke 2. A man boasts he can throw his pilum backhand. The optio assigns him to throw garbage backhand for a week. Light joke 3. Someone tries a heroic overhand slash with the gladius. The straw dummy survives and receives a commendation. You will be tempted, at least once, to keep your pilum for prodding in the close like a makeshift spear. Sometimes that's sensible. If you've lost your sword in a tangle, or if the line buckles and a long reach steadies a panic. But the doctrine likes clean hands. The cohort fights best when the front rank has both board and blade, and the extra length becomes a liability when a shield wall breathes in and out like a patient. Better to have thrown at the right moment than to drag an awkward promise through a narrow door. Historians still argue whether all pila were intended to bend reliably or whether many simply stuck straight and brutal, with bending more a function of impact and metal quality than grand design. The wooden peg story, popping loose on impact, appears in later sources, and archaeology shows both pegged and unpegged constructions. They also wrangle over throwing angles and range. Some advocate a relatively flat, forceful cast into the front rank. Others imagine a lofted arc into the rear files. The safest ground is that experienced units match their throw to terrain, wind, and the enemy's posture, which is to say, craft more than formula. Your second rank is the cohort's conscience. While you work the short grammar of board and blade, they watch for overreach, your foot too far ahead, your shield edge gaping, your elbow caught. Their spear ends and short thrusts cover the moment a front man rotates out or stumbles. Their pilum, if still held, becomes a barrier for a heartbeat, a hedge that keeps the other fellow from discovering your name. When the centurion taps the rim, the relief is almost dainty. 2 men shimmy back, 2 step in. The line never breathes hard enough to whistle. A good day lets you repeat the sequence like a recipe. Pila thicken the air with doubt. The charge eats 6 paces. The first minute of contact is all iron handwriting. The second minute settles into meter. Somewhere in the third minute you feel the other board soften. You do not chase softness. That is for cavalry and for stories told with cups. You maintain pressure. You take the step when the horn permits, and you notice how heavy your neighbor's shield has become, which is how you know his arm is tired and the relief is due. You do not love the man who invented this. You do thank him later. Quirky tidbit: on quiet afternoons men practice judging distance by shield. How much, boss? How many plank seams? So a centurion can bark. First throw at 3 seams. And the volley looks eerily synchronized. Another. After battle you'll see a circle of soldiers straightening bent pila by bracing the shank against a knee and leaning. Not perfect metallurgy, but good enough for one more drill before the armorer calls you barbarians. Missiles don't only begin fights, they end them politely. When the enemy line begins to lose its handwriting, a second, short-range pilum cast into a knot of men can turn a retreat into a scatter without forcing you to overextend. Slingers and archers then take over the punctuation as your cohort halts on the recall note, and lets others do the chasing. Rome's controlled pursuit doctrine tastes like self-denial in the moment and survival at dusk. Mainstream aside, crisp as the boss's edge, ancient accounts, Caesar, Polybius, consistently place a missile phase before close engagement. The Roman heavy infantry's pilum volley was designed to disrupt shields and cohesion, followed by the gladius sanscutum close fight. Relief within the cohort kept fatigue from deciding outcomes. Recalls curtailed hot pursuit to preserve order. Auxiliary missiles, archers and slingers, extended reach before and after the clash. Later centuries see a shift toward longer swords, spada, and more mixed missile fighting, but the early, high empire's recipe stays recognizable. Historians still argue how often legionaries used the testudo in open battle. Reliefs love a good tortoise. Manuals and logic say it's for missiles under siege approaches or concentrated barrages, not for the messy give-and-take of a line fight where visibility and agility matter. They also debate whether the front rank thrust targeted abdomen more than thighs or groin. Sources are discrete. Archaeology is unromantic. The consensus is dull and useful. Stab what the shield reveals. Avoid what armor protects. Live to cook supper. Light joke 4. An archer smirks that infantry only throw things once. You tell him you threw dice last night twice and won neither. Light joke 5. The cornisan says he can tell a good pilum volley by the sound it makes. The signifer says he can tell by the amount of paperwork afterward. Light joke 6. The optio claims he can block a pilum with his glare. The prefectus castrorum volunteers him as a target, and harmony is restored. Point 2. Small crafts make the big craft work. First, space stealing. Tiny heel digs that move your board into his breath. Boss nudges that create private windows, foot traps that turn his step into a story. Second, noise lying. Not the shouting that wastes wind, but the quiet grunts and rhythm taps on the shield rim that tell your file to push on the beat you choose. Cohorts that master these gain an inch at a time until inches add up to stories with happy endings. When things go sideways, the same grammar holds. A surprise wedge, cuneus, punches your neighbor? Hook it with 2 files, pin with pili used as short props, and let the reserve cohort make the decision. A rain of javelins taller than yours comes in from a hill? Kneel and roof shields, let the scorpions reply, then rise as one on the corners lift. The tools don't change. The order does. By dust the ground has swallowed most of the iron and given back the lesson. You can read the field the way a clerk reads a ledger, where pila struck true, shields abandoned, iron grinches and leather, where men tried to throw back and met bent shanks, where too many hacks scarred dummies instead of ribs because someone forgot the short grammar. The line that stopped when the recall sang will be the line that eats hot porridge under a sky that forgives. You oil your blade, pat the scutum as if it were a stubborn mule that did honest work, and plan to thank your wrist with extra vinegar. Throw, step, press, finish, stop, 5 verbs you will keep until your diploma's hinge creaks. You stand at the legion's shoulder and discover its favorite secret: the people who aren't legionaries. Your cohort looks like certainty, boards, iron, habits, but the edges of any good Roman plan are trimmed with other talents. Auxiliaries arrive like a menu: archers who make distance behave, slingers who insult physics, cavalry that turns a flank into a decision, and light infantry that moves through thickets as if the brambles signed a treaty. Rome learned early that a hammer is happier with tongs than a file. Auxiliaries are the tools that keep the blow clean. Meet them by sound first. On the right, horse bells tinkle and harness leather creaks, an ala of cavalry walking their mounts along the Via Principalis, faces turned to sky the way horsemen pretend to be weather experts. Batavians in the marsh smell like damp oak and adair. Numidians ride light and make dust look graceful. Thracians bring cloaks as loud as their hair and a loose way with curved swords. On the ridge behind you, archers from Syria test bowstrings with a musical twang and a superstition about which finger to kiss. Further back, a cohort of Balearic slingers whips smooth river stones into targets with a thwip that sounds like a disapproving grandmother. Their accents don't match. Their purpose does. Mainstream fact, crisp enough to nail to a gate. By the early empire, auxiliary units, cohorts of infantry, 500 men, some double strength, alii of cavalry, 500, 1000, and mixed cohorts equitati, were recruited from non-citizen provincials, peregrini. They served long terms, often 25 years, and on honorable discharge, received Roman citizenship recorded on hinged bronze diplomas that named the unit, governor, and witnesses. Over time, auxiliary command structures professionalized. Equipment increasingly converged with legion standards, though regional specialties remained prized, e.g., Syrian archers, Thracian and Numidian light cavalry, Batavian swimmers famed for crossing rivers in kit. By the 2nd century, auxiliaries were not second-rate troops. They were the empire's flexible arms and eyes. You watch how the battlefield grammar changes when auxiliaries write a clause. Before contact, archers step forward in a shallow crescent and make the air opinionated, plunging fire to unnerve, flatter shots to pick at officers, a last volley time to make your pilum more persuasive. Slingers, sneaky specialists, fling lead bullets, glands, engraved with rude messages that archaeologists now translate with blushes. The bullets fly farther than most expect and faster than most can see. Light infantry dart into pepper and retreat, the elastic cord that stretches an enemy line just enough to make the legions shove matter. Cavalry drafts the margins. On the open wing, the ala screens with feints and dust, testing for exuberant chasers. When a flank begins to wobble, a trumpet and a heel turn feint into punch. Lancers pin. Javelin cavalry harass. A small detachment circles behind to threaten the rear, forcing the other side to turn faces and expose ribs to your tidy close work. If a gap opens between enemy segments, horsemen flow like water through a fence, roving knives that turn separation into solitude. When the horn barks recall, the good ones stop on the beat and keep their saddles. The impetuous ones get stories named after them. Light joke 1. A cavalryman says infantry are speed bumps. You tell him he's a tax on hay. Light joke 2. A slinger claims his stones can curve. An archer says that's wind, and the slinger says, "Yes, my friend." Light joke 3. The Batavian shows you how to swim a river holding shield and sword over his head. You admire and volunteer to guard the bank. Auxiliaries also undo problems legions were not bred to love. Steep ground? Thracian peltasts climb like goats and fight like men who owe goats money. Forest tangle? Germanic scouts goes through undergrowth and report back in sentences that begin with, "Don't go there." Skirmishers sting, run, and sting again until the enemy either wastes energy or accepts annoyance. Both outcomes are useful. On sieges, auxiliary archers pin defenders while legion artillery lumbers into place. On defense, auxiliary cavalry chase raiders with a patience that borders on rudeness until they find a place to teach manners. Historians still argue whether auxiliary units retain strong ethnic identities over generations or whether Batavian, Thracian, Corps to Gallorum became mostly administrative labels once recruitment localized to the province of garrison. Early on, specialties track origins, Balearic slingers, Syrian archers, but by the 2nd century equipment and training converge, and a Thracian cohort in Britain may contain more Britons than Balkan sons. The debate matters because it colors how we imagine loyalty, to tribe, to unit, to paychest. Inscriptions offer both, proud old names on altars, mixed onomastics on tombstones. Quirky tidbit, lead sling bullets sometimes carry stamped sayings. Catch, or sharper, tiny ancient memes that now sit in museum cases labeled projectiles with inscriptions. Another, some auxiliary cavalry carried small drakons, windsock standards with bronze heads that howl softly when ridden fast. Before legions adopted the fashion, horses either found the noise inspiring or learned to ignore it like the rest of us ignore bagpipes after the 3rd cup. Auxiliary officers navigate Rome's social zipper. Commanders, praefecti cohortus /aeli, are equestrians with careers measured in provinces. Centurions equivalents, duplicarii sesquiplicarii, earn fractional pay bumps with fractional patience for excuses. A good auxiliary prefect knows his men's superstitions, their family arrangements, and which wines make which promises. He also learns how to talk to the legion's legate without sounding like a cousin asking for money. Promotion can lead to legion tribunate or staff appointments. Failure can lead to a quiet transfer to a quieter province with quieter wolves. Logistics keep the force multiplying honest. Horses need fodder and farriers. Archers need strings and spare knocks. Slingers ask only for stones and permission to smirk. The legate's quartermaster learns to love barley as an abstraction. How much fits on a wagon? How much a mule will forgive? How much a foraging party can gather without learning bad habits? In wet climates, feathers misbehave. In hot climates, bowstaves sulk. Everywhere, nails vanish, which is a universal truth that predated Rome and will outlive it. Mainstream aside, in ledger ink, auxiliary service confers legal perks, citizenship for the soldier and often his children at discharge, the right to marry, more formally recognized over time, and occasionally land grants in the province where they served. Seeding new communities with men who know the roads. Bronze diplomas, hinge plates with Latin on one leaf and a witness list on the other, are folded pride. Find one in a field and you find a story with a hinge. Many veterans settle near their forts, lending towns names and tempers that persist in local place names the way jokes persist in barracks. Coordination is choreography, not hope. When your cohort presses, auxiliary archers adjust angle to avoid friendly helmets. When cavalry prepares a feint, a cornicen's call warns your rightmost files to hold shields forward but not panic. When skirmishers fall back through your intervals, you open just enough without letting the enemy mistake hospitality for invitation. Drills the evening before count. A red flag on the right means cavalry pass through. 2 horn chirps mean archers shifting, and the vexillum dip twice behind the line means slingers ready, duck at the second beat. The man who invents this grammar deserves a statue. The clerk who remembers it deserves a raise. Light joke 4. An archer swears he can shoot a flea off a mule. The mule refuses peer review. Light joke 5. A cavalryman claims to have ridden through a doorway narrower than his virtues. The signifer says the standard fit too and is therefore unimpressed. Light joke 6. The slinger's bet whose bullet travels farthest. A legionary says his pilum travels exactly as far as it needs. Historians still argue. How often auxiliaries fought intermingled with legion lines versus on distinct wings and screens. Reliefs sometimes show mixed ranks. Texts often place auxilia on flanks. Practical commanders likely used both arrangements. Mixed files and tight ground to prevent gaps, distinct wings in open country to let cavalry breathe. Another ongoing debate. The exact ratio of auxiliaries to legionaries in a given army. 1-to-1 by head count is a common estimate for the High Empire, but the ratio flexes by theater and emperor. It's a numbers argument with coins and tombstones as witnesses. Both can be coy. The moral economy differs and harmonizes. Legionaries boast citizenship and the cult of the eagle. Auxiliaries boast the diploma they will earn and the fact that their pay sometimes buys better horses. In battle, shared danger varnishes such differences into humor. You with the wings, we with the wall, we both with the blisters. After battle, rewards are coordinated. Decorations, torques, armilli, fallery. Do not ask what passport a chest once carried. A wall crown on a Thracian brow looks as Roman as any. When the legate pronounces praise, he names units and deeds in the same sentence. Rome's compliment is inclusive when it counts. Quirky tidbit 2. Batavian swimmers, the legends say, crossed wide rivers with shields and swords held above water, sometimes using horses as floating friends. Whether every Batavian could or only the show-offs is unclear, but the reputation alone made enemies rethink riverbanks. Another. Auxiliary forts often have slightly different internal layouts. Stabling, wider gates. So an aerial view of a frontier can tell you who trotted and who marched. By dusk you recognize the day's geometry. Where your cohort pressed and held, auxiliary arrows stitched the seam. Where the enemy cavalry flirted with your flank, your ala wrote a firmer sentence. Where a woodline threatened to spit surprises, light infantry swallowed it first and burked. The field writes Roman grammar in 3 fonts, block capitals for the legion's line, italics for cavalry feints, and neat marginal notes for skirmishers' mischief. You share porridge with a slinger who has the forearms of a sailor. He asks to feel your scutum's curve. You ask to feel his bullet's weight. Both of you nod at the other's tool and the day that required it. The cohort sleeps better knowing the night has patrols on fast hooves and eyes that can hear a twig in another language. The auxiliaries sleep better knowing the ditch will be dug right and the recall will mean, stop now, not, stop soon. Rome wins when both truths are true. You roll in your cloak and listen for horse bells fading toward the dark and a soft thwip where a slinger practices on the far berm because he cannot help it. At the edge of your thoughts, a diploma's bronze hinges click shut in a future you can almost touch. You come to a city wall and realize battles are just loud prefaces to long arguments. Field fights are commas, sieges are essays with footnotes, scaffolding, and a bibliography that smells of pitch. The Legion does what it always does, it unpacks certainty. Out come wicker screens, rawhide mantlets, iron teeth disguised as carpentry, and a timetable that would make a bureaucrat blush. The wall frowns. You answer with geometry. First you deny the city its favorite verbs. Cavalry rings it like a patient belt to stop couriers from sprinting and grain from strolling. Pickets stretch outward into a second ring to keep rescuers from turning up with enthusiasm. When the place is serious, a Gallic hill town, a Greek colony with opinions, or an eastern stronghold with engineers, you build 2 lines, circumvallation facing in to hold the garrison, contravallation facing out to greet incoming friends rudely. Mainstream fact to pin with a tent peg, Caesar at Alesia, 52 BC, raised exactly such twin belts, ditches, ramparts, towers, and traps, so he could argue with Vercingetorix inside while insulting a relief army outside. It worked, and the Romans have bragged about it in tidy Latin ever since. Then the carpenters and diggers sing. You roll forward, Vinny, those arched wicker sheds, like creeping hedges. You join them into covered galleries, musculus, that let sappers come up to the wall without turning into anecdotes. Behind them trundle the heavy friends, a battering ram slung on chains under a shed roof, its iron head shaped like a ram that never met a hill it didn't love. Siege towers, 'tis ambulatory, creak up on great wheels, timbered stories as tall as the enemy's pride, carrying archers and scorpions to keep the battlements busy while the real work happens lower. If the ground sulks, you teach it manners with an adger, an earthen ramp thrown up by basket and curse, shovelfuls of new horizon compacted until the tower can climb. You can smell the Delabri smiling. Defenders, to their credit, have read the same book. They drop stones the size of opinions. They pour out hot pitch and sand that behaves like liquid teeth. They hook the ram's head with chains, trying to twist its rhythm into a stutter. They build counter towers and throw matting over vulnerable spots. A smart crew lets your ram strike a sacrificial facing, then shoves out a patch of fresh masonry at night so your dawn feels like déjà vu. You answer by shortening the swing and steadying the cadence. Ramming is a lullaby. You win when the wall falls asleep. Light joke 1. The ram crew names their beam, Old Faithful. The carpenter insists its real name is Receipt for New Timber, and the signifer calls it What Budget? Light joke 2. An archer on the third platform says he's taller than the city. A slinger on the ground says he's closer to the problem. Light joke 3. The Prefectus Castrorum claims towers are just vertical camps. The Optio says camps don't usually wander off on wheels. Sapping is patience with splinters. Under your creeping sheds, men dig at the wall's foot, cutting a tunnel whose roof is propped with stout timbers. They smear fat on the posts like cooks seasoning a festival. Then, when everyone is clear and the gods feel adequately courted, they fire the props. The satisfying crack and sigh you hear is the wall discovering gravity anew. Sometimes the ground heaves and the parapet slumps. Sometimes a neat bite disappears from the curtain like a missing tooth. You rush a storming party, ladders and testudo raised. All artillery plucks at defenders who forgot to duck. Historians still argue whether the famous vinegar trick, pouring vinegar into hot cracks to shatter stone, was anything more than a storyteller's recipe. Some think thermal shock on fire-heated rocks plus an acid quench could help when you're gnawing at a rough fieldwork. Others roll their eyes at the idea of dissolving limestone defenses with pantry supplies. The safer truth is that picks, levers, ramps, wedges, and fire did most of the persuading. Vinegar remained more popular in canteens than in engineering. Artillery does punctuation in stone. Ballistae hurl heavy bolts into crowded battlements. Onagri toss stones that leave conversations wherever they land. Scorpions spit iron darts to discouraging effect. You aim not only for heads but for habits. Corner towers where watch changes make men inattentive. Spots where two curtains join and mortar forgot to be ambitious. Roofs where fire likes to gossip. Crews work with cook's focus. Wind, elevation, counterweight. Adjust fire, adjust. A good ballistarius can put a stone where it will bounce twice and roll into a gathering with the social grace of a goat. Quirky tidbit. Crews often swaddled wheels and axles in rawhide and wet felt against sparks. Some even chalked the wheel rims to spot cracks creeping during a long push. Another, rams got mascots. Bronze rams' heads with expressive curls. And sometimes eyes painted on the shed, because superstition turns heavy labor into friendship. When a breach finally opened, it wasn't unusual for the men to decorate the head with a wreath, as if it had earned its own crown. Mining invites countermining, a dark dialogue with bad air. You dig, they dig. Somewhere beneath the wall picks begin to hear each other. Your men listen with bowls pressed to earth. Their men set jars of water and watch ripples. When tunnels meet, There's a close kind of fighting that even poets avoid: short blades, shields held sideways, a stubby spear finding a knee. At Dur Europos on the Euphrates, mid-3rd century, excavations suggest Sasanian attackers burned bitumen and sulfur in confined space, creating choking fumes that asphyxiated Roman tunnelers, chemistry discovering a grim footnote. You prefer the old method: outdig, outprop, burn supports, and let physics be the villain. Ladders are the humble cousin that always shows up. Under a storm of arrows and stones, you shoulder wood that groans like conscience and run for the wall. The testudo, shield roofing, forms in a practiced rustle. The first rank kneels, second roofs them, third overlaps, and your tortoise scuttles until something green and sticky lands sizzling on your boss and you remember why you like artillery so much. A brave soul hooks his ladder over the crenel and climbs into a dozen last-minute regrets. 2 cohorts later, 3 ladders hold, you spill men onto a walkway, and suddenly the far gate is trying to remember which way it opens. Mainstream aside, tidy enough to scribble on a dispatch. Roman siege toolkits included earthworks, adger/ramp, battering rams under sheds, mobile towers, mantlets, vini, plutii, sapping/mining with burning props, extensive use of artillery, and those twin belts of circumvallation/contravallation when relief was expected. Defenders replied with counterworks, fires, sorties, and countermines. If the place surrendered, the terms could be brisk. If it resisted to storm, discipline decided whether no quarter was policy or rumor. Discipline matters more than timber. A tower that creeps without panic, a ram that swings without vanity, a sap that burns when ordered, these win sieges as surely as walls lose them. You rotate crews before weariness turns into clumsiness. You cover archers with mantlets so they don't join the wall early. You time the final rush so the last salvo of stones lands while your ladders bite. The legate's job is scheduling courage. Who, when, how long, until the city finds itself bored with resisting and interested in terms. Light joke 4. The carpenters insist their tower is mostly straight. The surveyor says the earth is mostly round. The centurion says both should try harder. Light joke 5. A sapper emerges soot-black, eyes white as marble, and claims he and Vulcan are now on a first-name basis. The medicus prescribes water and less friendship with gods. Light joke 6. A slinger nails a pot of pitch midair. The archer says, lucky. The slinger says, train. And both accept to drink. Supply squeezes the city while wood squeezes the wall. Your cavalry turns gardens into reports. Your foragers extend a polite tax on orchards. Your quartermaster counts sacks of barley with a romance novelist's sigh. Inside, ration loaves shrink. The price of onions rises like a prophecy. The council argues about honor and bread while mothers argue about bread and honor. A good commander lets famine do the marketing for clemency. Open now, keep your property. Wait, and we'll count spoons. Rome prefers gates open from the inside. Wood and fire are plan B. Historians still argue. How often towers went all the way to parity with high classical curtain walls. Are the spectacular ramps of Masada, not Roman-built, and Avaricum outliers? Or did legions routinely move that much earth? Aerial archaeology of temporary camps shows plenty of aggression with shovels. Literary sources love a good adger and a heroic tower. The practical answer is that where timber, time, and morale allowed, ramps rose, and where they didn't, negotiations tried a different ladder. When the breach yawns or the gate sighs, your job is to remember that victory has rules. The first through are not the bravest but the most disciplined. Shields high, eyes low, ears on the horn. You push just far enough to take a gatehouse, to seize a tower that commands a street, to plant a vexillum where men can see and obey. Loot waits, the recall does not. The legate strides under soot and authority and decides whether this city will become a garrison, a client, or a cautionary inscription. Quirky tidbit 2. In some eastern sieges, defenders reportedly hurled pots of bees or wasps, portable bad moods, down on assault parties. Whether every garrison kept a hive or just the inventive ones is unclear, but you develop a new respect for veils. Another, legionaries greased ladders with pig fat to make them slide easier against stone, until defenders learned to fling ash and sand to ruin the joke. Why does the wall looks lower? Because your day got taller. The tower stands wedged up against the curtain like a friend who won't leave. The ram rests with a wreath on its iron brow. The musculus sits charred and accomplished. You can read the city's decision in its smoke. Thin and orderly means ovens. Thick and frantic means storehouses doing arithmetic. Your shoulders ache with the honest pain that comes from lifting the ground to where you need it. You wash pitch out of your hair with vinegar that refuses to dissolve any limestone, and you eat with both hands because one of them is still shaking in relief. You sleep that night with the weird comfort only siege work earns, the sense that you and timber and earth are on the same side for once. In the distance, a gate creaks like an old apology. The horn will announce terms in the morning. The carpenters will brag. The sappers will pretend they weren't afraid. The signifer will polish the discs until they reflect lies and hope in equal measure. You roll in your cloak and dream of flat ground and short walls, knowing you'll settle for good ladders and a steady cornu. Between storms you become a carpenter with a calendar. The Empire's enemies see legions. The Empire itself sees surveyors, stakes, and a ditch that will still be bossy when gossip forgets your name. Peace does not mean rest, it means roads, bridges, walls, warehouses that smell like dry grain and patience. You learn quickly that logistics isn't the backdrop to war, it's the genre. Begin with the line that never stops, the road. Agroma, that cross-plumb-line contraption that looks like a child's toy with authority, pins sight lines across hills and stubbornness. The corrugates, a leveling beam with water channels, teaches slopes to behave. The surveyors mark a straight course not because curves are immoral but because straight is faster to maintain and easier to police. Then the ground becomes a sandwich. The trench for the statchman, big stones, then the rudis, crushed rock and lime tamped until mules give up complaining. The nucleus, finer gravel and sand, and the summa crusta, paving of fitted stone where budgets smile or a compacted gravel crown where they don't. Cambridge sheds rain to ditches where frogs write odes. Milestones rise every Roman mile to tell you whose money paved the day and how far you have to go to argue with the next innkeeper. Mainstream fact, tidy as a milestone edge. Augustus formalized the imperial road network in the Cursus Publicus, a state-run relay post with mutations, horse-changing stations, and mansions, lodgings for officials. By the 2nd century the network tied legions to governors and markets to cities from Britain to Syria. Hadrian's Wall, begun 122 c, rode its own military road, mob castles and turrets spaced with the calm of a mathematician. While in the east the great highways from Antioch and along the Euphrates made letters move faster than rumors, which is the empire's favorite miracle. You stand on fresh paving and feel a doctrine underfoot, speed equals safety. A legion answering a frontier alarm on a metalled via arrives with energy left for the problem. The same legion slogging a muddy track arrives with opinions and a desire for soup. Bridges are the road sentences over water. Timber trestles on driven piles where rivers are civilized. Stone arches with cutwaters where rivers have vocabulary. Temporary pontoon spans when rivers are showing off. You will hear the story until you can build it in your sleep. Caesar's Rhine Bridge, 55 BC, piles angled against the current, braced with cross members, decked in days, a wooden verb conjugated in present tense, that made the other bank think harder. You walk a later bridge and admire the cofferdam's ghosts. Those temporary wooden boxes sunk and pumped out so piers could be laid dry while the river tried to eavesdrop. Quirky tidbit. In marsh country engineers laid pontes longe, causeways of fascines, bundled brush, and logs, like rolled carpets across sulking ground. Mules pretended to appreciate the artistry and then stepped ankle-deep anyway. Another, some milestones bear carved phalluses, a rough and ready. Good luck and forward. That modern tourists photograph with the seriousness of professors. Roads don't mean much without warehouses that can count. The horia, granaries, rise on stubby stone piers so air can stroll under floorboards and mold cannot. Slit vents in brick walls whisk heat away. Heavy doors announce that theft takes tools. In military zones, double-aisled horia stacks sacks of grain tiered like arguments. Oil sits in dolias sunk to necks in cool floors. The quartermaster's wax tablet becomes a novel. Unit allocations, convoy schedules. The day the cart axles decided to be drama. Grain is the army's second coin. Keeping it dry is the army's second piety. Between forts the cursus publicus beats time. An official with a diploma, a bronze or parchment pass authorizing mounts and rooms, arrives at a mutatio to swap a blown horse for one that hasn't heard his stories yet. At a mancio, the staff exchange stamps and indifference stew. Couriers in cloaks the color of authority cross provinces faster than rumors, which is how edicts outrun rebellions by a day and a half. The system works because it is boring. It fails exactly when somebody interesting thinks the horses are theirs. Light joke 1. A tribune tries to borrow a cursus horse with a smile. The station master says the smile must be countersigned by the governor. Forts are engineering turned into handwriting you can read from the air. Permanent legionary bases. Big rectangles with rounded corners, like a child's idea of a postcard, carry the same grammar. Veii Crossing, Praetorium centered, Principia, headquarters, with a flag court and a standard shrine. Horia aligned like quiet giants, baroque blocks in rows with hearths that remember last winter. Auxiliary forts shrink the plan and widen gates for cavalry. My castles on frontier walls host small garrisons and argument about whose turn it is to patrol in the rain. Every door, drain, and downspout says habit, in a dialect stone understands. Frontiers are where engineering and theater co-author. Hadrian's Wall, stone in the east, turf in the west at first, runs 80 Roman miles coast to coast. Mile castles every mile, turrets between, forts astride or behind. The Vallum, a great ditch and mound system south of the wall, sets a controlled zone for movement. Logistics with manners. To the north, the Antonine Wall, begun 142 c, is turf on a stone base, shorter-lived but still bossy. In Germany and Rhaetia the Limes is not a single wall but a zone. Ditches, palisades, watchtowers, roads, proof that frontier, in Rome is a verb as much as a noun. Historians still argue whether the Limes was primarily a defensive barrier, a customs and policing cordon, or a stage for demonstrating order. Did walls stop raids or steer them into schedules? Was the Vallum about defense or about regulating supply and official traffic? And on roads, were the famed multi-layered constructions universal or idealized? Did terrain and budget often produce simpler gravel causeways with the same ambition? The archaeology is a chorus, in some places marble, in others, good intentions and local stone. The debate keeps engineers and epigraphers happily employed. Bridges deserve their own jokes and lawsuits. Timber is quick and sulky, stone is slow and proud. Pile drivers, weighted rams hauled by teams, punch sharpened logs into riverbeds. Cofferdams hold back gossiping currents. Arch ribs are set with centering frames, then eased into trust as the keystones settle like a good argument. Cutwaters, triangular noses on piers, split flood pressure. Icebreakers on northern rivers learn to hate spring with grace. The best bridges are the ones no one remembers until a flood writes them a letter. Logistics stretches beyond food to feet. Mutatio intervals align with horse endurance, not map aesthetics. Legion marching camps. Routes at day-length distances so a column can depend on water and defensible ground even when the quartermaster has the plague. Boat bridges stitch crossing points before permanent arches gather budget. Ferries supplement where rivers sulk. When emperors tour, the curse's schedules stretch thin. When wars come, they tighten until mules walk in time to the tuba. Light joke 2. A surveyor lays out a road so straight it ignores a senator's vineyard. The senator objects. The road does not. Light joke 3. A mule refuses a bridge because it can see water through the slats. The cavalryman borrows your cloak to blindfold the philosopher, and equilibrium returns. Between crises you build things that make the next crisis smaller. A detachment cuts a new adger over a bog that bullied carts. Another lines a ford with fascines and stones so hoofs don't invent poetry. A third repairs a culvert no one thanked until it failed. You help raise a burgess, a small tower outpost, on a highway that bandits mistook for a buffet. You watch traffic learn manners. You help roof a way station stabula so the curse's horses don't write angry letters in hoof. Mainstream aside, ledger straight, Julius Caesar boasts of building a timber bridge over the Rhine in about 10 days. Hadrian's Wall begins in 122 C and runs roughly 73 modern miles. The cursus publicus is attributed to Augustus. Granaries on piers and with ventilated walls are standard military architecture. Road construction terms, statumen, rudis, nucleus, appear in later technical texts and match. Layered roadbeds found by spades. Historians still argue. Who did the heavy lifting? Did legionaries personally quarry, haul, and pave as a matter of pride and punishment? Or did they supervise civilian contractors and press local labor while focusing on military-specific works? Inscriptions honor legions for building. Papyri and pragmatics suggest mixed crews, soldiers, specialists, locals, under military schedule. The best guess is what you see on the ground: soldiers with shovels where it matters, contractors where efficiency and experience matter more, and plenty of signatures carved in stone to make sure Rome gets credit. Quirky tidbit 2. Some milestones include not only distances and imperial names but also the cost of repairs, a passive-aggressive way of telling future officials how much good taste costs. Another, road crews sometimes buried coin hoards for wages under milestones. When a squad rotated out early, the ground inherited a nest egg and archaeologists a very good day. You learn to respect drainage the way poets respect metaphor. Ditches run parallel to valley-like thought lines. Culverts move under embankments while pretending to be local. Retaining walls terrace hillsides so wagons don't rehearse downhill tragedies. In fortifications, titularly, short ditches in front of gates slow strangers into target practice. In Horea, raised floors make grain a little island. In bridges, scuppers spit rain like small insults. The discipline you learned with the gladius turns out to be the same discipline the land requires. Small, repeated decisions that keep failure from finding momentum. By dusk you've set a line of milestones that will outlast 3 emperors and a fashion for new sandals. The crew's camber is true. The ditch falls to the right. The mancio at the next creek now has a roof that leaks only in bragging. A letter rides past in the hand of a courier who looks like bad news traveling at a responsible speed. You wash dust from your hair with a ladle, listen to the carpenter curse a warped plank in a dialect that recognizes gravity as a personal enemy, and watch the quartermaster count sacks as if numbers could feel his stare. Tomorrow may be a skirmish, or a bridge launch, or a quiet day of culverts and jokes. All 3 feel like victory in slow motion. The truth settles like tamped gravel. Rome wins between battles. Every road reduces the amount of courage you need next month. Every bridge shortens a panic. Every warehouse turns weather into a statistic. You fall asleep to the click of a marble counter in some office far away, the low rumble of wagons on new stone, and the contented sigh of a ditch that knows exactly where the rain will go. You live by a drum you can't always hear. Disciplina is the Legion's invisible wall, the habit that keeps fear from getting a vote. You feel it in the way your tent ropes align, in the hour the tessera arrives, in the fact that your scutum edge is where your neighbor expects it before you expect yourself. Orders can fail, habits don't, which is why Rome spends more time training your wrists than inspiring your speeches. Discipline starts small and stays constant. The contubernium is 8 men and 1 reputation. The tent rises straight, or the optio stick explores geometry on your back. Miss roll call, pay a fine. Lose a shovel, pay a bigger fine. Nod on sentry duty and meet a punishment that teaches memory the long way. The vitus, the centurion's vine staff you politely oiled in Section 4, doesn't exist to make you flinch, it exists to make you correct. A quick tap on a sagging shield, a crack across a lazy strap, a thump of encouragement toward the ditch line. These are punctuation marks in the sentence you live. Mainstream fact to nail to the tribunal. Roman armies codified penalties ranging from fines and pay stoppages to demotion, fustiarium, beating to death, especially for desertion or dereliction in strict times, and in extreme and rare cases, decimation. Executing 1 in 10 by lot to terrify 9 into remembering what we means. Famous under Crassus during the Spartacus War. Rewards were just as formal. Dona militaria, military decorations, such as the Corona Civica, oak crown for saving a citizen, Corona Moralis, first over a wall, Corona Valaris, first over a rampart, plus Valerii, discs, torques, neck rings, and armilli, bracelets, often recorded on tombstones and worn proudly on parade. Donatives, cash gifts on an emperor's accession or victory, and premia, discharge bonuses, sweetened obedience with arithmetic. Light joke 1, the Praefectus Castrorum says discipline is doing the right thing when no one watches. The Optio says it's doing it when I watch. Light joke 2, the signifer claims his discs jingle an iambic meter. The cornicin insists that's anapestic and assigns him extra polishing. Light joke 3, a recruit asks whether the vitus has a name. The centurion says, "Yes, please don't." Punishments taste different depending on the sin. Theft from a comrade means shame in public and repayment with interest. Theft from the standards means a conversation with gods and a sentence with no appeal. Cowardice in the line earns collective remedies. Extra ditch digging for the century, barley instead of wheat for rations, the famous Hordeum dare, and the knowledge that your mates now watch your back with more curiosity than trust. Desertion is treason. The legion's patience ends where its oath begins. Lesser sins meet lesser inventiveness. Standing all day in front of the Principia holding your shield at arm's length while the imaginator's portrait looks disappointed. Carrying the heaviest palisade stakes until you and would achieve intimacy. You also live by praise because Rome knows carrots by better stories than sticks. Public commendations before the standards. Your name called, your deed recited, your centurion's nod a small sunrise, are a currency that never devalues. A torx hangs on your chest like an argument that keeps winning. Valerii clink just enough to make other men resent you productively. The Corona Civica, oak leaves bound by gratitude, grants not only honor but old privileges. The Senate must rise when you enter, taxes smile for a while, and people speak your name with the odd, quiet tone reserved for those who pulled a fellow citizen back from statistics. Rather nice for a hat made of tree. Quirky tidbit. The Corona Civica had to be awarded on the saved man's testimony. He stood and publicly declared, "He saved me," which makes it the rare prize you could not brag yourself into. Another, some units kept a parade board, a wooden frame hung with spare decorations for drill. Nobody marched bare-chested on inspection day, not even the chronically unlucky. Belt fittings jingled, remember those from Section 4? And some officers claimed they could tell a good unit by the music of its march. Discipline in D major. Symbols weld discipline to identity. The standards, signa, vexilla, the aquila, are not just navigation, they are conscience. You swear by them each January, you can still taste the incense, and you touch them before the bad day becomes worse. The imago, the emperor's portrait, reminds you that your oath has a face and that loyalty is easier when it has cheekbones. Coins echo the cult, reverses with standards between SBQR, legends, or the proud Signus Receptus. Augustus liked to boast when lost eagles came home. The legion is an idea. The standards let you point at it without starting an argument. Historians still argue whether decimation happened beyond a handful of dramatic instances. Crassus, yes, perhaps a few early imperial fits. But did good commanders ever use it after discipline professionalized? Some say fear kept its place only in stories. Others point to scattered inscriptions and suggest rare, ugly realities. They also argue over corporal punishment's frequency. Did centurions truly cudgel at will, or did practice settle into fines, extra duty, and emotion except in crisis? The consensus trend leans towards severity on paper, moderation in habit, terror reserved for calamity, discipline as predictability, not spectacle. The oath, sacramentum, is moral cement. You renewed it when the year turned and when emperors did. You learned its shape in your mouth until you could say it half asleep on second watch. Break it, and law strips you down to biology. Keep it, and law makes room for your jokes, your marriage, eventually formal for legionaries under Severus, earlier for auxiliaries on discharge, your discharge diploma. The oath and the pay chest live in the same tent. The signifer guards both, which is either poetry or practicality. Rome seldom distinguishes. Light joke 4. The Tesserarius catches a man stumbling over the watchword and assigns him to practice with the straw dummy from section 5. The dummy refuses to answer and receives an equal punishment. Light joke 5. A medicus says the cure for low morale is clean water and fewer parasites. The centurion says it's clean orders and fewer opinions. Both are right and immediately disagree about vinegar. Light joke 6. The aquilifer swears the eagle looks heavier on days with inspections. The surveyor says gravity respects rank. Rewards do not end at ribbons. Leave passes extend by a day when a ditch line gleams. Double grain rations arrive after a storm well managed. An extra bath token appears on a man's bedroll after he hauls a comrade out of a collapsed sap. Promotions, immunes to principales to centurion, are the long applause. Sometimes they come with the vitus, sometimes with a desk and the power to ruin someone's afternoon with a neat note. Discharge is the empire's final compliment. Cash, debased or not, it still buys a roof, land in a colony, or at least the bronze diploma that promises your children will not have to explain why their father swore in Latin. The cult of the standards fills the space punishment should not. In the 80s signorum of a permanent camp, the eagle and allied signer receive offerings, wine, incense, vows for safe campaigns, thanks for safe returns. When an eagle is lost, remember Teutoburg, and later recovered, the parade is not about metal, it is about restarting a story. The standard bearer's pelts, wolf, lion, are not just theater. They are clothing that makes fear feel like a job it should clock into. On festival days, decorations glitter on tunics while civilians line streets to see what discipline looks like when it smiles. Quirky tidbit 2. Discipline eats nostrums. Some units swore by garlic strings, section 6, for bite prevention and bravery. Others by a specific marching song whose rude refrain allegedly reduced desertion. One Fort's graffito reads, Canam laborat non mangicat. A Romanized proverb scrawled above a tool rack by a man who had clearly been assigned too many shovels. Another, a few tombstones depict the Vitus as lovingly as the Gladius, proof that leadership tools, like heroes, are complicated. Historians still argue about tattoos, where legionaries routinely marked on the hand or wrist, stigmata, for identity and discipline. Or is that more a later/Byzantine practice read backward by tidy minds? Some texts hint, others hedge. Skin seldom survives to testify. They also debate whether the Corona Moralis and Valaris were actually one with the criteria manuals claim, first over the wall, first over the rampart, or whether commanders awarded them for leadership that made first possible. Archaeology can show a crown, not the minute that earned it. Discipline has a public relations office. Coins show soldiers receiving standards from the emperor's right hand. Reliefs parade model ranks, every sandal obediently the same. Art flattering habit and habit flattering art. In camp, the paid parade is choreographed kindness. Horn, line, sign, count. The signifier calls names like blessings. The centurion watches for gratitude that behaves like saving. Punishment, when necessary, is visible enough to teach and discreet enough to let men keep faces they can shave without staring at regret too long. Good commanders scold in specifics and praise in plurals. Bad ones reverse the order and discover their tents feel colder. You keep a private shelf for symbols that tell you who you are when the ground tries to say otherwise. A small token from a saved comrade, an acorn carved in wood, reminder of the oak crown you didn't claim, a bent pilum head hammered straight and kept as a paperweight for the letters you owe, a strap from a shield boss that met fire and stayed. No law gives these meaning. Discipline borrows it and spends it wisely. By dusk, the day has practiced its quiet virtues, password in place, tent lines straight, vinegar in the water bucket, vie swept of the mud that breeds slips. The buccina sings the watch. The imaginator's wax face shines in lamplight, pretending not to melt. The signifier sets the standard where your eyes can find it if a dream wakes you rudely. You roll in your cloak, feel the belts jingle, finally go still, and realize discipline is not a scowl but a lullaby. It is the promise that the man on your left will be your neighbor tomorrow. It is the reason the garlic worked, the straw dummy learned your name, and the Delabra keeps thinking it's a weapon. The empire will pay you with coin and land. Discipline pays you with predictable dawns. You wake to the soft creak of leather and the calm voice of someone who speaks in verbs like breathe and rest. The tent canvas filters the morning into honeyed light. It smells faintly of boiled linens, wine, and a little vinegar, the army's perfume of reassurance. A medicus with steady hands checks the bandage that your squad mates tied last night with the terrified precision of men handling a friend. Welcome to the part of the legion that wins by keeping you numbered, the valetudinarium and the quiet economy of getting you back on your feet. The place runs on order even when bodies don't. In a permanent fortress it is a real building, stone or timber halls arranged around a courtyard, with a covered portico so patients can walk shaded laps, wards opening off a central corridor, a dispensary where the pharmacopolis guards jars like a dragon that reads recipes, a surgery room with a window for light, and drains that make bad water someone else's problem. Field campaigns scale this into tents with marked areas, intake, dressings, the "you're fine but dramatic" corner, and a nook where a medicus whispers to a cornicean that the horn won't be needed today. The stretcher bearers, the capsarii, named for the little medical satchels they wear, move with that brisk, apologetic confidence that says they have practiced every walk between ditch and hope. Mainstream fact you can trust like a clean bandage. The Roman army maintained organized medical care. Inscriptions name Medici Ordinarii, regular doctors, and Medici cohortus attached to units. Archaeologists have uncovered purpose-built military hospitals, valetudinaria, at sites such as Novisium, Neuss, Vindonissa, and Vetera, with standardized plans, wards, courtyards, latrines, and drainage. Surgical kits from forts and towns, scalpels, forceps, probes, needles, cautery irons, match the instruments described in medical authors like Celsus and Scribonius Largus. Wine, vinegar, honey, and resin appear again and again as cleansers and dressings. Opium and mandrake show up in recipes for sleep and mercy. Triage is a kind of choreography. A capsarius cuts away crusted tunic with a knife he sharpens by habit. Another rinses with wine, which he calls the good vintage, because jokes reduce flinches. And the medicus decides with one glance whether you need thread, splints, rest, or a stern note that says, "No heroics for 3 days." Good news. The pilum left a polite bruise and the scutum did its job. Better news. You made it here fast because the cohort drilled casualty carry as seriously as it drilled testudo. Remember, the Optio had said, if you drop him, he will haunt your tent and mock your stitching. Light joke 1. The medicus writes your name on a tablet with a script so neat you feel healthier. Light joke 2. He prescribes wine, rest, and no digging. The Prefectus Castrorum prescribes rest, wine, and light digging, and you discover therapy is negotiable. Light joke 3. A capsarius swears the straw dummy from drill fainted during practice. The medicus nods and says, barley rations for it. Sanitation is half the cure and most of the prevention. Latrines sit where wind and gradients approve. Ditches run where rain is told to go. Hands rinse in vinegar water before dressings, after dressings, and whenever a thought seems suspicious. Bathhouses, when the map is kind, make steam part of therapy. On campaign, a heated tub improvised from a shield and a clever fire helps a fever sweat itself into a story you'll exaggerate later. The Medici lecture about feet, because feet are soldiers. Dry them, oil them, check for blisters before blisters become opinions. The medicus is a realist. I cannot cure your courage, but I can cure your sandals. Historians still argue whether dedicated hospitals existed at every fortress, and whether the standardized plan we see at some sites was universal, or a best case. Some forts reveal clear valeted area. Others show adaptable Baroque spaces used as wards during operations. They also debate how strictly antiseptic Roman practice really was. Wine and vinegar have modest antimicrobial effects, honey helps wounds. But did routines consistently prevent infection, or are we seeing the survivor's story? The safest answer is that the army's obsession with cleanliness, water management, and routine gave you better odds than chance, and better odds are all a soldier can ask for. The tools are confident without being theatrical. A bronze or iron scalpel with replaceable blades nestled in a roll of linen. Probes for finding splinters and the day's worst choices. Forceps to make foreign bodies politely domestic. Needles for gut, and skin with thread that behaves. Cautery irons for the moment a medicus looks at a bleeding vessel and says, with infinite regret, heat. Splints come from the carpenters, who are quietly proud of how many bones they've persuaded back into work. Slings come from the tent makers, who grumble about soldiers who think cloth is immortal. Poultices smell of honey and resin and herbs whose names you pretend to remember because faith assists healing. Quirky tidbit: some medical kits include small stamp labels, bronze tags or ring seals engraved with the owner's name and specialty, the ancient equivalent of, "Please return to the infirmary if found." Another, lead sling bullets carry rude little messages, you've seen them. But medics sometimes kept a few in a bowl to show patients what had not hit them today. Perspective, the original sedative. Recovery is a schedule disguised as kindness. The medicus assigns days, 3 of rest with light walking under the portico, 3 of stretching and carrying a wicker shield, not the heavy board, 3 of drill without pilum throwing. Reassessment. Then, if the wound nods politely, you return to the century before your jokes go stale. The immunes, specialists, often become halfway houses. Survey teams happily adopt a man who can carry stakes and not cough. The armorer lets him polish until he sees his face twice. The cornicen might recruit a rhythm clapper for timing drills. The line loves you, but the line needs you whole. Food does its silent work. Rations tweak toward the mending body. more pulses and barley stews, a drizzle of oil promoted from rumor to fact, maybe a slice of cheese that has been waiting for an honest excuse. Honey turns medicine into cooperation, wine into rinses because vinegar has already taken most of the headlines. Sleep, which the camp builds so carefully with ditch and watch and password, becomes the best doctor. You learn a new respect for the man who keeps the tessera circulating on time. Mainstream detail in one clean breath. Roman authors like Celsus describe wound cleaning with wine, suturing, cautery when necessary, splinting for fractures, and the virtues of rest and diet. Scribonius Largus lists pain remedies, including opium preparations and mandrake. Archaeological finds of hospital buildings at legionary bases show consistent attention to drainage and airflow. Military medical staff are attested epigraphically, medici of legions and cohorts, some with specific specialties, including medicus ocularius in civilian contexts. Add to that the army's infrastructural hygiene, latrines with running water, bath access, strict camp layout, and you have a system where prevention is policy. You also live with the soft medicine of friends. The contubernium visits in twos, bringing gossip wrapped around dates and a spare pair of socks that someone finally washed. The signifer stops by, not to talk money, he swears, but to remind you the standard misses your shadow. The aquilifer adds, deadpan, that the eagle has asked for a quieter night without your snoring. A junior officer reads a letter for a man whose schooling lagged behind his courage. Someone leaves a sprig of that garlic, remember? The insecticide and confidence booster from the camp line, at your bedroll because traditions are placebos that work. Light joke 4. The medicus claims vinegar can clean anything. The quartermaster hands him a ledger and says, "Start here." Light joke 5. A patient fakes snoring when the ditch detail passes. The tesserarius compliments his realism and signs him up to time the horn for watch changes. Light joke 6. The prefectus castrorum asks if you're ready to return to light duty. You ask if he means lighter ditches, and he says, "Exactly, lighter on my conscience." Historians still argue the success rates for surgeries like trepanning or deep wound repair. Texts boast, bones whisper caution, and modern experiments with replicas suggest Roman tools could do delicate work when steadiness and sanitation aligned. They also puzzle over how often soldiers received formal medical discharge for chronic injuries and whether pensions adjusted for disability. Some diplomas and papyri suggest cases of early release, but the paperwork, like scar tissue, is patchy. When fever visits, the medicus turns into a weatherman. Cool water, shade, careful sips of diluted wine. He speaks of bad air, because that's the era's vocabulary, but his practice, drainage, ventilation, clean water, latrines siding, fights vectors without getting lost in theory. You remember Section 12's drains and whisper a thank you to culverts. Bowel complaints get the soft diet and the stern lecture about hand washing. Eye irritations earn salves and a few days out of the dust line. Twisted ankles earn a week of humility counting stakes. The best medicine is still prevention braided into discipline. Sandals inspected before march. Nails replaced before slips turn into sprains. Cloak dried before a cough thinks it's welcome. Mess gear scrubbed with vinegar before yesterday becomes today. You notice that the medicus and the centurion agree on more than they argue. Small habits save lives. Your cohort's humor, gentle, insistent, keeps men from sulking their way into infections. Your officers' schedules keep tired men from taking shortcuts that end in stories no one wants to tell. By dusk you walk a slow lap under the portico, counting steps against the rhythm of the bacchina changing the watch. The linen tugs a little. The air feels like advice. The sky over the intervalum is that impossible Roman blue that makes you forgive the ditch for being a ditch. Tomorrow you'll carry the wicker shield, not the heavy scutum. Next week, if the medicus nods and the centurion pretends not to smile, you'll throw a pilum at a straw dummy that has somehow developed stage fright. You touch the edge of your belt, and it jingles a soft chord that says, "Almost." You lie back and think about all the quiet engineering inside you and around you, sutures and drains, schedules and passwords, garlic and jokes, turning another soldier into a soldier again. The Empire does many loud things, but this is one of the quiet ones you will remember with a private gratitude. Someone cleaned, bound, counted, and waited. The camp murmurs, the valetudinarium breathes in its square rhythm, and you do the most military thing of all. You sleep on purpose. You march out beneath a sky that remembers eagles and will learn to recognize dragons, and you notice your shadow looks a little different. The scutum is more oval than door-shaped now. The short gladius has lengthened into the spada that swings happier on a longer reach. Your pouch carries something new that ruins strangers' plans. Weighted darts called plumbaty, tucked behind the shield rim like rude secrets. The Legion never stops being the Legion. It merely edits itself to stay readable. The enemy edits, too. On the open grasslands ride Sarmatian and later Gothic and Hunnic cavalry, armored men on armored horses, cataphractarii and clibanarii, who argue that momentum is a weapon. In the east, Parthian and Sasanian lancers write long sentences at speed. In the Balkans and along the Rhine, mixed war bands test borders like curious fingers on a fence. Rome's answer is to keep the fence and add a patrol car, fixed frontier troops, limitanii, who live with the ditch and the watchtower, and mobile field armies, comitatenses, who move where maps blush. Mainstream fact to nail this to the table. Under Diocletian, r. 284 to 305, and Constantine, r. 306 to 337, the army reorganizes into border garrisons and central mobile forces. The Notitia Dignitatum, early 5th century, lists these units with proud insignia, proof that the system had become a habit. Your kit tells the story in hardware. The oval shield's boss still thumps like truth, but its lighter build suits rapid movement. The spatha's length helps when a line flexes and you need to reach around a neighbor's board. The plumata flashes out at the last 50 paces, an underhand flick, a mean little arc that turns a gallop into a reconsideration. Spears, haste, return to fashion in many units. Javelins remain but share the stage. Armor tends toward mail and scale again because plates sulk under long marches and longer repairs. Helmets grow crossbars like eyebrows, late, ridge, types that catch blows and complaints. Quirky tidbit. Some soldiers stash 5 plumbaty in little loops behind the shield leather. More than one recruit learns the hard way to remove the darts before sitting down. Tactics pivot like a door that just learned it was a gate. Against cavalry, you deepen ranks, stiffen the first 2 files with angled spear points, seed the ground with tribuli, caltrops, and let the darts do their whispering work at the last possible moment. Your own horse, now a larger share of the army, rides in layered arms, light javelin cavalry to herd and harass, lancers to punch, armored shock to meet enemies who think iron is a personality. The field army travels with more horse archers than your grandfather would have called Roman, which is exactly the point. Fashion follows necessity. When the fight is foot on foot, your line leans into a tighter shield wall, spears forward, shorter throws of whatever the quartermaster issued this season, then the familiar push and thrust where habits, not heroes, decide. Historians still argue whether this change is decline or adaptation with different music. One camp says the late army thinned into underpaid border farmers with spears, our limitanii, and flashy but brittle field troops, that training waned and barbarian federati, eroded Roman core. Another camp says the evidence shows a leaner, more flexible force designed for a world of raids and fast wars, that limitanii were professionals with local duties, and that integration of non-Roman fighters was policy, not surrender. The dirt gives both sides gifts. The debate keeps the footnotes warm. The frontier looks less like a single wall and more like a nervous system. Watchtowers blink messages along roads, small forts, birdie, stud river crossings, deep defense layers ambush points and patrol paths. In Britain and Gaul, late Roman shore forts, Litus Saxonicum, guard coasts with thick, squarish towers made for artillery and sudden guests. The legionary fortress is still a thing, but the army increasingly disperses into packets that add up to presence. Engineering never retires, roads still camber, bridges still argue with spring, Horia still breathe on raised floors. Factories, fabrici, imperial arms workshops, sprout near key rivers and capitals to standardize kit and shorten the distance between order and delivery. Mainstream fact to stop the night from inventing. Constantine wins at the Milvian Bridge, 312, reforms coinage with the gold solidus, breaks the Praetorian Guard, increases cavalry's importance, and founds Constantinople. Dedicated 330. In 378 at Adrianople, a Roman field army under Valens is mauled by Gothic cavalry and mismanagement. The cautionary tale that every corniston can recite between notes. Laws codify unit names and privileges. Late Roman shield emblems, those discs and comets painted on boards, live in the notitia like little heraldic gossip columns. Your century now hears more languages in the line. Federati, allied war bands settled on rations and promises, fight alongside comitatenses. Some commanders keep personal bucellarii, household retainers, who eat good hard biscuit, buxolatum, and ride when told. Historians still argue whether Federati diluted loyalty or simply exported Roman discipline into new throats. What you know is that a man who stands the recall and holds a gate at midnight belongs in your tent more than a slogan does. Officers mind the mix. Promotions still rise from ranks and patronage, but a clever magister militum reads faces first, pedigrees later. Signals and symbols update their wardrobe. The Draco becomes common, a windsock serpent that howls when the air says, hurry. Crystograms appear on some standards and shields after Constantine. Chiro tucked where lightning once monopolized attention. Some cohorts still swear by Jupiter, others by the god favored in the capital. Both keep passwords and watch lists like grown-ups. Quirky tidbit, late shields, repainted for new units, sometimes keep ghost designs under the fresh pigment. Scrape hard and yesterday's emblem winks from beneath, like a palimpsest that refuses to forget. Siegecraft stays itself with new neighbors. Against Sasanian walls and Roman breakaway regimes alike, towers roll, rams swing, mines smoke. But field forces also learn to break sieges by mobility. Drag an enemy into a chase he cannot supply, pull him off his ladders, make his carts feel old. Supply evolves with taxes in kind, annona militaris grain, fodder, cloth, boots collected and moved on schedules a quartermaster could whisper in his sleep. Mobile armies mean mobile bakeries. Standard loaves make men predictable. Predictability is still the empire's favorite flavor. Your drill hums in a lower key. The straw dummy still refuses to duck, the Delabra still believes in theology. But exercises include more open-order fighting, more sudden turns to meet feints, more up shields, darts, down shields, step. Cavalry parades beside you, practicing the wheel that seems mechanical until a trumpet melts it into a charge. Artillery crews keep scorpions alive and teach stones to land where commanders point. The Vitus remains persuasive. The Medicus still answers to vinegar and thread. The Tessera still walks the night on time. Historians still argue. The head count. Did legions shrink from 5,000 to paper-thin paper strengths? Did legion become a prestige name for much smaller units? The notitia lists a forest of titles: legions, auxilia, comitatenses, limitanii scoli, and archaeology finds forts built for fewer beds. The safe sentence, the word, legion, stretches, the army spreads, and effectiveness depends less on any single unit's thickness than on how well the system breathes. Alarms to response, supplies to mouths, orders to brass. And yet, in the dust of a late century afternoon, you could still recognize the old friend beneath the new kit. A line dresses on its standard. A horn note steadies a wobble. A centurion's vine staff taps a shield rim, and the man behind it remembers where courage lives. The road behind you is still hard. The ditch before your camp is still tidy. The baker still brags. The quartermaster still sighs. The signifer still counts names as blessings. The empire's edge frays and is darned. Provinces switch emperors as often as they switch jokes. But the army's underlying trick stays the same. Make the right thing the easy thing, and then repeat it until even chaos conforms. Light joke 1. A Draconarius claims his windsock scares more foes than your plumata. You suggest a contest in a stiff breeze and he suddenly admires your darts. Light joke 2. A Bucellarius brags about his biscuit ration. Your contubernium invites him to meet real stew. Light joke 3. The surveyor says the new fort's wall is curvilinear. The prefectus castrorum says curves are fine as long as the gate is punctual. The sun drops. The password arrives. The eagle, or the Draco, watches you lay your head down with the same old stare. You have been many versions of Roman, maniple, cohort, field army, frontier guard, and each version learned to sleep on purpose. Tomorrow, perhaps, a ride to escort grain down a river you bridged in section 12. Perhaps, a long stand on a windy tower where the only enemies are boredom and a desire to carve your name in a stone you don't own. Perhaps, a quick march to a rumor that forgot how to be dangerous. You roll your cloak tight and let the continuity hum. Roads, ranks, passwords, porridge, jokes. The empire has changed its posture. The legions have changed their steps. The cadence, somehow, is still yours. The camp quiets the way a thought settles. Horn calls lengthen into softer curves. The bacchina's last note hangs, then thins, then folds itself away. You ease onto your side, cloak pulled high against a breeze that smells of damp earth and banked fires. And every strap that pinched today remembers how to be kind. Far off, a watchtower lamp writes a small golden comma on the dark. Just enough punctuation to tell the night it's being read. Breathe in, slow, like a tide that keeps its own counsel. There is the leather warmth of your belt, finally stilled, the faint metal tang of oiled fittings, a breath of garlic from the tent flap where someone's charm does more good than it has to. Beyond the rampart a cart creaks once as wood relaxes. Even the Vitus sleeps, propped quietly against a post, content that shields stood where they should. Let your thoughts list themselves into a drowsy column. A road straightening across a hill. A bridge that learned to trust its arches. A shield boss that met the day and came back round. 5 little darts tucked neatly behind the rim, patient as birds. Let the names that made you smile today drift wider. Optial, signifer, medicus. Their syllables smoothing out, their edges rounding like pebbles in a slow stream. Scholars can argue tomorrow. Tonight the debates turn to murmurs and the murmurs to breath. Feel the ground accept you. The ditch outside and the password within make a simple promise. You can close your eyes and the line will still be a line when you open them. The standard, eagle or dragon, doesn't need you for a few hours. It watches the same stars you do and approves. Your heartbeat finds the camp's old rhythm, the one that lives under every reform and fashion, and paces itself to gentle dot if a thought returns. Let it pass like a patrol along the Via Principalis. Nod, and let it go. The lamp guttering near the doorway is someone else's turn to mind. The horn will come in its time. For now, the only schedule is rest. In, out. Sand soft under shoulder. Leather soft at wrist. Breath soft in the quiet, softer, softest.